Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the peculiar world of medieval peasant superstitions, where a sneeze could summon spirits, and garlic wasn't just for pasta. What you're about to discover might make you rethink that rabbit's foot on your keychain. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. You're standing in a muddy field, clutching your side and praying that the sharp pain isn't a prelude to the Grim Reaper's visit. Welcome to the medieval world of healthcare, where your best shot at surviving that nagging ache might just involve a handful of leeches and a fervent prayer. You see, in this era, the common folk had a curious mix of faith and fear when it came to medicine. They believed that bloodletting could cure anything from a headache to the bubonic plague. The humble leech was the medieval multi-tool thought to balance the humours, those mystical fluids believed to govern your health. And while you might cringe at the thought of these little bloodsuckers, they were the medieval equivalent of aspirin. Now, if leeches weren't your thing, you might consider a potion of ground unicorn horn. Yes, you heard that right, unicorn horn. But before you start imagining herds of majestic creatures being hunted for their magical appendages, let me shatter that illusion. That so-called unicorn horn was often just narwhal tusk, imported from the far reaches of the Arctic. The Vikings, clever traders that they were, made a tidy profit selling these tusks to gullible Europeans who were more than willing to pay a premium for a piece of magic. It was a classic medieval bait and switch, with narwhals playing the part of the unicorns they never were. Speaking of economics, let's talk about the medieval healthcare system. The local apothecary was your go-to for all things medicinal, a cross between a pharmacist and a wizard, really. Armed with herbs, potions, and the occasional dried newt, they were the beating heart of medical practice. Apothecaries were craftsmen of concoctions, blending ingredients with an artful hand. However, their fees were no small matter. A simple potion might cost a peasant the equivalent of a week's wages. Imagine shelling out a hefty sum for a bottle of what was essentially crushed beetle and a sprinkle of hope. But why all this reliance on potions and peculiar treatments, you ask? It was all about the humours. Medieval medicine revolved around balancing the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If one was out of whack, so were you. This theory, courtesy of Hippocrates and Galen, lingered well into the Renaissance, morphing into the likes of bloodletting and purging. Doctors of the time were more akin to gamblers, rolling the dice with your life and hoping for a favourable outcome. Of course, superstition wasn't just confined to the apothecary's shelves. It permeated every layer of society. The Black Death, for instance, was a breeding ground for bizarre beliefs. Some thought it was caused by bad air, while others blamed the alignment of the planets. The more creative souls suspected Jewish communities or angry saints. In a world where answers were few and far between, you clung to whatever explanation seemed least likely to result in your untimely demise. And let's not forget the role of religion in all this. The church had a monopoly on knowledge, and what they didn't know, they made up. Sickness was often seen as divine punishment, and penance was as common a prescription as any herbal remedy. But when the church wasn't enough, you turned to the local wise woman or cunning man. They were the unofficial healers, armed with folklore and a deep understanding of the natural world. They had a knack for treating ailments with remedies passed down through generations, their knowledge both feared and respected. In this world, where the line between life and death was as thin as a shoddy thatch roof, superstition was a survival strategy. It filled the gaps where science had yet to tread, offering a semblance of control in an uncontrollable world. So, the next time you reach for an aspirin, spare a thought for your medieval counterpart who might have opted for a leech or a potion instead. It's a reminder that what we now dismiss as superstition was once a vital thread in the tapestry of survival. Now, shifting from the leech-infested waters of medieval medicine to the fertile fields of agriculture, let's dig into the earthy world of peasant superstitions. Medieval peasants were an inventive bunch, not just in their farming techniques, but in the elaborate rituals they concocted to ensure their fields yielded enough to keep the spectre of starvation at bay. It It wasn't just about tilling the soil or sowing seeds. It was a full-blown theatrical production starring bones, blessings, and a sprinkle of fear. Take, for instance, the delightful practice of burying animal bones in fields. It sounds like a macabre treasure hunt, but it was all in a day's work for a medieval farmer. The bones were thought to have mystical properties that could ward off evil spirits, pests, and anything else that might threaten the precious crops. Some might say it was medieval pest control with a supernatural twist. The practicality of it, though, was that burying bones added phosphorus to the soil, a crucial nutrient for plant growth. Of course, your average peasant probably didn't know about phosphorus. They just knew that when they buried bones, the crops sometimes grew better. It was a classic case of practical results wrapped in the cloak of superstition. And then there was Plough Monday, a day that turned the mundane act of ploughing into a community spectacle. Held on the first Monday after Epiphany, Plough Monday was less about the hard work of ploughing and more about the ritual and revelry associated with it. Villagers would dress up, sing, and parade a plough through the streets, sometimes accompanied by the mischievous antics of a plough fool and a Bessie, who would dance and playfully demand alms. This wasn't just an agricultural practice, but a social event that reinforced community bonds and marked the start of the agricultural year. It was medieval Motivation Monday, a way to kickstart the hard graft of farming with a bit of fun before the real work set in. Why all the fuss, you ask? Well, medieval farming was no walk in the park. It was more like a tightrope walk over a pit filled with famine, disease, and taxes. A bad harvest could spell disaster, and with the average peasant family consuming around 700 calories a day, mostly from bread, losing your grain crop was a ticket to starvation. Throw in a few bad seasons, and you weren't just hungry, you were history. That's why superstitions thrive. They offered a semblance of control in an uncontrollable world, a way to hedge your bets against Mother Nature's fickle temperament. But let's not romanticize it too much. For every quaint ritual, there was a harsh reality. Farming required grueling labor, often for little reward. Peasants worked dawn to dusk, with little more than basic tools and brute strength. The blacksmith's anvil was as crucial as the priest's blessing, with tools constantly needing repair. The economic system didn't exactly favor the farmer either. Much of the crop yield went to the local lord as rent or taxes, leaving the peasant with just enough to scrape by. No wonder they turned to anything that might tip the scales in their favor, from the divine intervention of saints to the supernatural power of buried bones. Superstition and necessity were two sides of the same coin. Peasants knew their survival hinged on forces beyond their control, weather, pests, disease, and yet they toiled on, armed with rituals that blended faith and function. In a way, these practices were an early form of risk management, a medieval insurance policy against the whims of fate. Sure, burying bones and parading ploughs might sound absurd today, but back then it was a lifeline. The romantic appeal of these superstitions is undeniable. They add a touch of mystery to the mundane, a sense of magic in the muck. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a story of resilience in the face of adversity, of people doing whatever it took to eke out a living from the land. It's a testament to human ingenuity, to the lengths we'll go to survive and thrive, even when the odds seem stacked against us. So, next time you're enjoying a slice of bread, spare a thought for the medieval peasant who might have been out in the fields, bones in hand, casting their hopes into the earth. It's a reminder that behind every superstition lies a story of survival, where the lines between magic and reality blur in the fertile soil of history. And remember, while we might chuckle at their quaint beliefs, they were just doing what humans do best, adapting, innovating, and yes, sometimes dreaming a little magic into their world. In the next chapter of our medieval saga, we'll delve deeper into the curious customs that surrounded the harvest, where folklore met festival in a celebration of survival. Until then, keep your wits about you and your superstitions handy. After all, you never know when you might need a bit of medieval magic in your life. As we tiptoe into the shadowy realm of medieval superstition, let's flick the cobwebs off those old tales of witches, ghosts, and omens. Just imagine a world where your neighbor's odd herbal brews weren't just concoctions, but potential curses, and a black cat crossing your path could signal an impending doom. Welcome to the supernatural side of the Middle Ages, where fear of the unknown shaped daily life in more ways than you might guess. The medieval mind was a sponge for the supernatural, soaking up every whisper of witchcraft and ghostly presence. In a time where streetlights were a distant dream and the night was an abyssal void, the imagination ran wild. It was a world where the word witch wasn't just a Halloween costume, but a serious accusation, often lobbed at those who dared to stray from the norm. If you're wondering how to spot one of these so-called witches, just look for signs as subtle as a wart or a love of cats. Seriously, that was sometimes enough to get you branded as a practitioner of the dark arts. The stakes were high, and the consequences often fatal. Witchcraft was the medieval scapegoat for all sorts of misfortunes, from a failed crop to an unexpected illness. In fact, the infamous witch trials were no spontaneous hysteria, but a calculated response to societal upheaval. Between 1450 and 1750, around 80,000 suspected witches were executed in Europe, with about 80% being women. Not just any women, mind you, but often those who were poor, widowed, or otherwise marginalized. These trials were less about justice and more about control, a tool for reinforcing social hierarchies and quelling the fear of the unknown. But why witches? Why not, say, werewolves or vampires? Well, witches were convenient villains. They were often the wise women, the healers, the ones who didn't fit neatly into the patriarchal puzzle. They knew things, herbs, midwifery, the cycles of the moon, and that knowledge was both feared and coveted. In a society where knowledge was power, and power was tightly controlled, anyone who threatened that balance was a target. The witch hunts were as much about maintaining power as they were about purging evil. Ghosts, too, were more than just spooky stories told around a campfire. They were manifestations of unresolved issues from the past, revenants from the grave, if you will. In a society where death was a constant companion, it made sense to believe that the dead might linger. Ghosts were often seen as souls trapped by unfinished business or improper funerals, their spectral presence a reminder of debts unpaid, both literal and metaphorical. In a time when legal systems were more eye for an eye than rehabilitate and reintegrate, ghosts served a moral function, warning the living to settle their affairs lest they, too, wander restlessly after death. Then we have omens. These were the medieval versions of red flags, portents of disaster that ranged from the mundane to the celestial. A comet streaking across the sky wasn't just a pretty light show. It was a harbinger of doom, an omen that the cosmos itself was out of balance. The sighting of Halley's comet in 1066, for example, was seen by many as an ominous sign preceding the Norman conquest of England. And it wasn't just celestial phenomena that had folks on edge. A sudden swarm of locusts, an unseasonal frost, or even a peculiar birthmark could all be interpreted as signs from the divine, or perhaps the diabolical. But let's not kid ourselves. These beliefs weren't just about fear. They were also about control. In a world where life was precarious and the future uncertain, superstition offered a framework for interpreting the chaos. It allowed people to feel as though they had some measure of agency, even if that agency was as simple as carrying a lucky charm or reciting a protective prayer. The supernatural provided explanations where science and reason were lacking, filling the gaps with narratives that, if not comforting, were at least familiar. Of course, not all omens were ill-fated. Some were seen as promises of good fortune. A rainbow after a storm, for instance, might be taken as a sign of divine favor, a celestial nod of approval. This duality of omens, a bad penny on one side, a four-leaf clover on the other, mirrored the unpredictability of life itself. It was a constant balancing act between hope and fear, faith and doubt. It's easy to dismiss these beliefs as quaint relics of a bygone era, but they served a purpose, one that resonates even today. They were coping mechanisms, ways of dealing with a world that was often brutal and unforgiving. Superstitions offered an illusion of control, a sense that the universe, though vast and indifferent, might still be influenced by a well-timed ritual or a whispered incantation. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, the supernatural was woven into the very fabric of existence. It was both a reflection of and a response to the harsh realities of the time. And while we might chuckle at the notion of witches and ghosts today, the underlying need for control and understanding remains as relevant as ever. As we prepare to delve deeper into these mystical beliefs in the next part, remember that superstition was more than just a collection of odd practices. It was a survival strategy, a way for people to navigate the uncertainties of life in a world where answers were scarce and danger lurked at every turn. So, keep your eyes peeled for signs and portents, because in the medieval world, you never knew when a ghostly whisper or a witch's hex might change your fate. And who knows, maybe a bit of ancient wisdom could serve us well in our own unpredictable world. Now, as we turn our gaze from the shadows of medieval superstition to the tangled web of love and marriage, let's unravel the curious customs of courtship in the Middle Ages. Forget modern dating apps and swipe-right romances. Back then, love was as much about survival as it was about sweet nothings. And believe me, the medieval approach to romance was anything but straightforward. Marriage in medieval times was a strategic chess game, where love was often the pawn sacrificed for the gain of family alliances and economic security. Picture this. You're a young peasant with a family to think about, and marrying off your daughter isn't just about finding her a nice guy with a charming smile. Nope, it's about securing her future, and more importantly, your own. Marriage was an economic necessity, a transaction sealed with vows and veils, not just violins and valentines. For the average peasant, love might have been a luxury, but it didn't stop them from trying to stack the odds in their favor with a little help from superstition. Enter the love potion, that fabled elixir of desire, a concoction that promised to turn the head of that aloof suitor or rekindle the passion of a husband more interested in his plough than his partner. These potions were a blend of herbs and hope, often containing ingredients like mandrake root and other aphrodisiacs. The belief in their power was so strong that the church eventually condemned them, lumping them in with witchcraft and other such heresies. It turns out that even in medieval times, people were skeptical about love at first sip. But let's not skip over the pomp of courtship rituals, where the line between romance and ritual was as thin as a bridal veil. The betrothal ceremony was often more important than the wedding itself, a formal agreement where families hashed out the nitty-gritty details like dowries and land rights. This was serious business. After all, a dowry wasn't just a token of goodwill. It was a sizable chunk of wealth, sometimes equivalent to several years' worth of income, depending on one's social standing. And if you're thinking, what about love? Well, that was often secondary, if it factored in at all. Now, onto the weddings, which were less about choosing the right band and more about ensuring the right balance of power. The ceremony itself was filled with symbolism, much of which was designed to bind the couple not just to each other, but to their respective families. For example, the tradition of hand fasting, where the hands of the couple were literally tied together with ribbon or cord, was more than a quaint custom. It was a literal binding contract, a physical manifestation of the union and its obligations. And let's not forget the superstitions surrounding wedding days, because naturally they had plenty. Brides would carry herbs like rosemary and garlic, not just for their aromatic charm, but for their supposed protective properties. These were considered talismans against evil spirits and bad luck, because who wants a cursed marriage? Better safe than sorry, right? Meanwhile, the tradition of the bride standing to the left of the groom wasn't just for aesthetics. It was so the groom could keep his sword arm free in case he needed to fend off any last-minute objections, or perhaps a scorned lover. But why all the fuss over marriage in the first place? Well, the economic and social stakes were sky-high. Marriage was a cornerstone of medieval life, particularly for the nobility, where alliances could make or break fortunes and power structures. For the peasants, it was a matter of survival, pooling resources to better weather the storms of life, quite literally, as those medieval winters were nothing to sneeze at. In this world, where the personal was deeply political, marriage was not just a union of two people, but a merger of properties and prospects. It was a chance to climb the social ladder, or at least not slide further down it. So, whether you were a nobleman seeking to expand your land holdings, or a peasant trying to secure a stable future, your marital status was your status quo. And yet, amid all the pragmatism, there lingered a belief in the power of love to transcend these worldly concerns. The troubadours and poets of the time immortalized romantic love in their songs and stories, idealizing it as a force capable of conquering all. It's easy to see why these tales were so popular. They offered an escape, a glimpse of a world where love was the ultimate triumph over adversity. But even the most romantic ballads couldn't erase the reality that, for most, love was less about the heart and more about the hearth. So, As we wrap up this chapter of medieval matchmaking, let's remember that while the rituals and superstitions might seem quaint or curious today, they were a vital part of a society trying to navigate the complexities of life and love in a world that was as uncertain as it was unforgiving. And who knows, maybe there's something to be learned from a time when love was seen as a gamble worth taking, even if the odds weren't always in your favor. As we prepare to dive into the next installment of our medieval saga, keep in mind that these customs, while seemingly arcane, were the threads that wove the social fabric of the time. They reveal a world where love was both a risk and a reward, a dance between duty and desire. And while we might shake our heads at the superstitions that guided them, they remind us that the quest for love, and the lengths we go to secure it, is a timeless tale indeed. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the peculiar practices and enduring legacies of medieval life in our next exploration. As we wrap up our medieval saga, let's stand back and admire the tapestry we've woven from the threads of superstition, survival, and a touch of the supernatural. You see, in a time when the world was as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast, these beliefs weren't just quaint quirks, they were lifelines. They provided a sense of control in a chaotic universe, where the next crop failure or plague outbreak was just around the corner. It's a bit like carrying an umbrella on a sunny day. You know it's not foolproof, but it's better than standing in the rain unprepared. Now, these superstitions, whether they involved leeches, love potions, or lunar eclipses, weren't just random acts of medieval madness. They were deeply pragmatic, serving as coping mechanisms for a society constantly grappling with the whims of fate. For instance, the belief in leeches as medical cure-alls wasn't just blind faith. It was a desperate attempt to manage illness in an age where the average life expectancy was around 35 years. When bacteria and viruses were as mysterious as the dark side of the moon, a little bloodletting seemed like a reasonable gamble. And what about those love potions, you ask? Sure, they sound like the stuff of fairy tales. But in a world where marriage was more contract than Cupid, a dash of placebo magic could help smooth the rough edges of arranged unions. It wasn't just about snagging a spouse. It was about securing a future in a society where a single bad harvest could leave you destitute. So, while the idea of a potion made from mandrake root might make us chuckle, for medieval folks, it was a practical approach to marital harmony. But let's not forget the shadowy spectre of witches and ghosts, those ever-present reminders of the unknown. Witch hunts and ghost stories served a dual purpose. They enforced social norms and offered explanations for life's inexplicable events. In a world where a sudden illness could wipe out a village, attributing it to a witch's curse was oddly comforting. It shifted the narrative from random chaos to a story with a villain, a plot twist that made the unpredictable feel just a bit more manageable. The impact of these beliefs rippled outwards, shaping not just individual lives, but entire communities. Take the witch trials, for example. They were less about justice and more about wielding power, reinforcing societal hierarchies in an era where the church and state were as inseparable as a knight and his steed. These trials weren't arbitrary acts of cruelty. They were calculated moves in a high-stakes game of control where fear was the currency and conformity was the cost. Meanwhile, the rituals surrounding agriculture reveal a society doing its best to hedge its bets against the fickle hand of nature. Superstitions like burying bones in fields might sound like medieval hocus-pocus, but they were grounded in a very real understanding of the land's needs. It was an early form of what we now call sustainable farming. Sure, the farmers might not have known the science behind it, but their instincts were spot on. In a world where your next meal depended on the whims of weather and soil, every little ritual was worth a shot. And yet, these superstitions weren't just about survival. They also provided a sense of community. Events like Plough Monday were more than agricultural rituals. They were social glue, binding communities together in shared purpose and celebration. In a time when isolation was as deadly as disease, these communal activities were vital. They reinforced social bonds and provided a sense of identity and belonging, crucial elements in a world where the individual often played second fiddle to the collective. So, what do these medieval superstitions tell us about human nature? At their core, they reveal a timeless truth, our deep-seated desire for control in an uncontrollable world. Whether it's the medieval farmer hoping for a bountiful harvest, or the modern individual searching for certainty in a sea of chaos, the drive to find meaning and mastery over our circumstances is universal. We might laugh at the idea of buried bones and love potions, but today's world is filled with its own rituals and beliefs that serve similar purposes. From lucky socks to startup feng shui, we've merely swapped one set of superstitions for another. In the end, superstitions are like the stars in the medieval sky, guiding lights in a vast, often bewildering cosmos. They offered comfort, community, and a semblance of control, allowing people to navigate life's uncertainties with a bit more confidence. And while we've replaced leeches with vaccines and love potions with dating apps, the essence remains the same. A quest for understanding and agency in the face of life's unpredictability. As we close this chapter on the strange superstitions of medieval peasants, let's carry forward the lessons of resilience and adaptability they teach us. After all, history isn't just a record of what was. It's a mirror reflecting who we are. So, whether you're facing down a modern challenge or simply trying to make sense of a chaotic world, remember that a little bit of medieval magic might be just what you need. And who knows? In the grand tapestry of history, maybe the real magic lies not in the rituals themselves, but in our enduring belief that, somehow, we can shape our own destinies. You crack open your eyes to the sound of wood creaking ominously above you. Welcome to your first morning in a medieval siege tower, the skyscraper of the Middle Ages. Forget the glinting armor and heroic charges of Hollywood legend. Your reality is a cramped, swaying wooden behemoth towering over 60 feet high. Think of it as the medieval version of a penthouse, except much less glamorous and a lot more flammable. This morning, you're not in a luxury suite. You're sandwiched between sweaty soldiers packed tighter than sardines in a can. The air is thick with the aroma of unwashed bodies and anxiety. No, you're not having a nightmare. This is your new normal, at least for today. Let's talk architecture, shall we? Siege towers were the engineering marvels of their time. Constructed from massive quantities of timber, these towers were the love child of a mobile fortress and a battering ram. Imagine stacking Lego blocks, but on a colossal scale, using entire forests worth of trees. It took hundreds of laborers to build one of these giants, and the cost was enough to make a nobleman weep into his goblet of mead. Picture this. A single siege tower could easily set you back the equivalent of a medieval king's ransom. Literally. If you're curious about the bill, estimates suggest it took around 100,000 board feet of timber, about the amount you get from 5 acres of decent forest. Considering the medieval economy, where wood was as valuable as gold, this was no small investment. And don't forget the labor costs. You'd have a couple of hundred skilled craftsmen and laborers sweating it out for weeks, all for the glory of moving this wooden juggernaut a few hundred feet closer to a fortress wall. Now, let's bust a few myths. The image of brave knights charging into battle is largely a romantic invention. In reality, they were more likely to be found atop their horses, urging on the poor souls inside the tower, like you, to risk life and limb. You're surrounded by foot soldiers, archers, and maybe a few unlucky peasants who got roped into this gig. It's less a knight's tale and more a series of unfortunate events. Inside the tower, it's bustling yet oddly claustrophobic. The floors are stacked like a medieval apartment building, each level packed with soldiers ready to storm the castle walls. You find yourself on one of these cramped levels, where the only view is through narrow slits designed for archers. The walls are thick, reinforced with iron plates to fend off arrows, but let's be honest, they're not the most comforting when a flaming missile comes your way. Speaking of flaming missiles, the biggest design flaw of these towers was their vulnerability to fire. One well-aimed flaming arrow, or a part of Greek fire, think medieval napalm, could turn your wooden skyscraper into a towering inferno. And here you are, cozied up inside, wondering if today's the day you become a cautionary tale for future generations. But why go to all this trouble? Siege towers were designed to breach the defenses of castles and fortified cities. The idea was simple. Get your troops over those pesky walls without having to scale them directly under a hail of arrows and rocks. Kind of like creating a shortcut in a video game, but with significantly higher stakes. So here you sit, part of a grand strategy to conquer a castle. The political and economic stakes are as high as the tower itself. Castles were the power centers of the time. and controlling one could shift the balance of power in a region. The siege tower isn't just a weapon, it's a statement of intent, a testament to your side's determination and resources. As the day wears on, the tower sways slightly with every gust of wind. You try to steady yourself, clutching at the rough-hewn wood, and ponder the sheer absurdity of it all. The tower is a marvel of medieval engineering, sure, but it's also a testament to human stubbornness and ambition. It's a reminder that when humans set their minds on something, be it building a tower to storm a castle or inventing a siege engine that defies logic, nothing is truly impossible, just wildly impractical. This isn't what the poets wrote about, is it? Forget the tales of glory and valor. The reality of a medieval siege tower is a lot less romantic and a lot more sweaty, cramped, and downright terrifying. But that's history for you, messy, complicated, and full of surprises. And as the sun sets on your day in this wooden colossus, you've got a newfound appreciation for the gritty realities behind the legends. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where every day is an epic, whether you like it or not. So here you are, settling into your new medieval digs, where every creak and groan of the siege tower is a not-so-gentle reminder of its precariousness. But let's pivot from existential dread to the real morning grind. Logistics. Imagine waking up to the delightful perfume of unwashed bodies and the medieval version of a porta potty. If your plan today was to find a quiet corner to freshen up, well, you might want to lower those expectations. First off, let's talk sanitation, or the tragic lack thereof. You'd think with all those resources going into building this wooden wonder, someone would have considered the necessity of, waste management. But no, you're left with the charmingly medieval solution of a communal bucket system. It's as glamorous as it sounds. The bucket gets passed around like some twisted party game, reminding everyone that privacy is a modern luxury. And when it's full, well, let's just say that the surrounding landscape gets a little less picturesque. Now, as you're contemplating how to hold your breath longer than a pearl diver, let's dive into the culinary delights this siege offers. The menu du jour consists of salted meats and stale bread, a combo that makes prison food look like a Michelin-starred meal. Remember, salt was the medieval way of playing refrigerator, so every bite is a salty reminder that fresh food is a distant dream. And if you're wondering about greens, don't. Vegetables in a siege tower are as mythical as unicorns. Water, the liquid gold of medieval warfare. Dehydration is your constant companion, lurking like a vulture ready to swoop in. While the local streams and wells are the lifelines, they're often contaminated or, worse, controlled by the besieged. So, you're left rationing your water supply, sipping just enough to keep the Grim Reaper at bay. If you're feeling a bit faint, it's not just the heat or the smell. It's your body reminding you that hydration is not optional. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of disease. Living in close quarters, privacy is non-existent, and germs are the only thing freely shared. You're packed tighter than a can of medieval sardines, and with that comes the risk of dysentery, typhoid, or the plague. The medieval version of a health plan. Pray you don't catch anything. It's a stark reminder that in the Middle Ages, survival was more about luck than skill. Yet, despite all this, the siege was a waiting game, a test of endurance as much as strength. Timing was everything. In a world without smartwatches, you relied on the sun, your stomachs growling, and the morale of your fellow tower dwellers to gauge the days. Siege warfare was less about the immediate clash and more about outlasting the other side, and some sieges dragged on for a record-breaking eternity. Take the siege of Rochester in 1215. Lasting over 2 months, this epic standoff was a medieval marathon, not a sprint. The patience game wasn't just about wearing down the enemy, it was also about maintaining your own side. The longer you held out, the more your resources dwindled. It wasn't just about having the bigger army, but the better logistics, the more sustainable supply chain. You were playing a high-stakes game of chess, except the board was a muddy battlefield, and the pieces were hungry and tired humans. So here you are, a tiny cog in this massive war machine, trying to keep your spirits up as you navigate the daily grind of medieval life. It's a far cry from the romanticized tales of knights and nobility. But hey, who needs chivalry when you've got your trusty bucket and a slice of hardtack bread? Right. This isn't just a siege. It's an epic lesson in patience, resilience, and the will to survive despite the odds. So as you munch on your salted meat, Squinting through the tower's slits at the fortress beyond, take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. You're part of a grand historical narrative, a story told not in the polished prose of courtly love, but in the gritty, unvarnished truth of life in the trenches. And that, my friend, is the true essence of history. Messy, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating. So there you are, living the medieval dream, or something like it, as you munch on your salted meat and squint at the fortress walls. But hold on tight, because afternoon isn't just about basking in the sun while leaning against wooden beams. Nope, it's time to get up close and personal with medieval weaponry, where the fun really begins. First up is the ballista, the medieval love child of a crossbow and a siege engine. Picture this, a giant mechanical beast that hurls enormous bolts with bone-rattling force. Think of it as the artillery of the Middle Ages, capable of puncturing walls or skewering a row of unfortunate souls in one go. The mechanics are surprisingly complex, involving twisted skeins of rope that store tension like a giant rubber band on steroids. It was precise, deadly, and in a world without GPS, astonishingly accurate. But here's the kicker. The cost of a single bolt could equal the annual wage of a skilled craftsman. That's right, one shot could set your treasury back as much as the yearly salary of the guy who makes your shoes. Talk about putting your money where your mouth and weapon is. And just when you think you've got a handle on medieval destruction, meet the trebuchet. If the ballista is a precise sniper, the trebuchet is the heavy hitter who doesn't mind getting its hands dirty. This giant slingshot can hurl a 90-kilogram stone up to 300 meters, enough to make any castle wall rethink its life choices. The mechanics are pure genius, using counterweights to fling projectiles with devastating power. It's the medieval equivalent of a long-range missile, and much like modern warfare, it's not cheap. A single shot could cost a fortune, roughly equivalent to a craftsman's yearly earnings. Imagine justifying that on your expense report. Now, let's address the romanticized myth of the fearless archer. Sure, the image of a lone bowman picking off foes with laser-like precision is enticing, but reality was more chaotic. Archers were the medieval equivalent of infantry, and while they were crucial, they weren't the infallible marksmen of legend. The chaos of battle meant arrows flying in every direction, often hitting anything but their intended targets. Not to mention, the bowstrings were made of animal gut or hemp, which could snap without warning, leaving you as useful as a sword without a blade. Speaking of chaos, medieval warfare was less of a choreographed dance and more of a chaotic pub brawl. Imagine hundreds of soldiers clashing in a cacophony of screams, clanging metal, and thundering footsteps. Commanders shouted orders that were often drowned in the din, while soldiers relied on battle cries and banners to distinguish friend from foe. The battlefield was a swirling mass of humanity, where confusion reigned supreme and survival often depended more on luck than strategy. Amidst this bedlam, political machinations were as critical as martial might. Sieges were as much about negotiation and diplomacy as they were about brute force. The castle you're besieging isn't just a pile of stones. It's a power center controlling trade routes, agricultural lands, and political alliances. A successful siege could shift the balance of power, turning the tide of regional politics. But surprise, surprise, not every siege ended in bloodshed. Often, the mere threat of overwhelming force was enough to compel a surrender. More castles were taken by negotiation than by force, proving that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the scroll, was mightier than the sword. Still, sieges dragged on, testing the endurance of everyone involved. Take the siege of Orleans in 1428, which went on for 7 exhausting months. It became a waiting game, with both sides trying to outlast the other in a grueling test of patience and resources. The besiegers had to manage dwindling supplies while keeping morale high. Meanwhile, inside the fortress, defenders rationed food, conserved water, and prayed for reinforcements. It was medieval chess with very real, very hungry pawns. And let's not overlook the economic impact of these drawn-out conflicts. Funding a siege was a monumental task, draining the coffers of lords and kings alike. Every catapult, every bolt, every soldier's wage had to be accounted for. The financial strain was immense, often leading to increased taxes or loans from wealthy merchants. In some cases, defeating a rival was less about military victory and more about bankrupting them into submission. As you sit in your swaying siege tower, pondering the economic and political stakes, it's clear that medieval warfare was a multifaceted beast. Not just a clash of arms, but a complex interplay of strategy, economics, and diplomacy. And while the legends may tell tales of gallant knights and heroic victories, the reality was often much messier, driven by pragmatism and the cold, hard calculus of survival. So here you are, a player in this grand, gritty drama, experiencing firsthand the raw, unvarnished truth of medieval life. It's a far cry from the romanticized epics. But hey, who needs legends when the reality is this fascinating? Welcome to the Middle Ages, where every day in a siege tower is a lesson in history, humanity, and the relentless march of time. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the medieval skyline with hues of orange and purple, you might think the siege tower would quiet down. But if you're expecting a medieval lullaby to ease your descent into slumber, think again. Instead, you're greeted by the symphony of groans and grumbles from your fellow tower dwellers, each one grappling with the psychological toll of siege warfare. Let's get real for a second. Being stuck in a siege tower is like being trapped inside a giant, creaky wooden anxiety box. Sure, the fear of flaming projectiles and the ever-present threat of disease are enough to keep your heart racing, but the real kicker, the soul-crushing monotony. It's like being on the world's worst camping trip, minus the S-mores, and plus a whole lot of existential dread. Psychologically, siege warfare is as much about endurance as it is about strategy, and the siege of Jerusalem in 1099 provides a textbook example of this mental marathon. It was a brutal, bloody affair that lasted over a month, culminating in a conquest that would make even the most hardened generals shudder. Imagine the scene. Thousands of crusaders, fired up by religious fervor, laying siege to a city teeming with defenders determined to protect their home at all costs. For both sides, the siege was a test of nerves as much as arms. Now, historically speaking, the Crusaders weren't exactly known for their subtlety or their patience. According to accounts from the time, the attackers resorted to psychological tactics designed to break the defenders' spirits. Heralds were sent to the city walls, shouting promises of mercy or threats of annihilation, depending on the mood of the day. It was a medieval version of good cop, bad cop, with a side of religious zealotry thrown in for good measure. But let's not kid ourselves. Propaganda wasn't just a tool of the besiegers. The defenders had their own tricks up their sleeves, rallying morale with tales of divine intervention and promises of salvation. They painted themselves as the righteous underdogs, a narrative as old as time and just as compelling. In the end, both sides were locked in a psychological tug-of-war, each one trying to outwit and outlast the other. And while we're on the topic of morale, let's talk about the unsung heroes of medieval warfare, the camp followers. These were the cook's medics, and yes, even entertainers who traveled with the army, providing much-needed support and a semblance of normalcy. They were the glue that held the operation together, offering a reprieve from the chaos and a reminder that life outside the siege tower was still ticking along. Yet, despite their efforts, the psychological strain was relentless. Imagine the constant noise, a cacophony of clanging metal, shouted orders, and the ever-present hum of human anxiety. It was enough to drive even the most stoic soldier to the brink. The monotony was punctuated by bursts of chaos, each skirmish a reminder of mortality, each lull in the fighting a chance to dwell on the grim reality of the situation. Primary sources from the siege of Jerusalem offer a haunting glimpse into this psychological warfare. Chroniclers wrote of soldiers driven to madness by the unending tension, their minds unraveling under the weight of fear and anticipation. It's a stark reminder that the human mind has limits, even in an age when mental health was as misunderstood as it was stigmatized. In the face of such adversity, maintaining morale was a Herculean task. Leaders had to balance the harsh realities of siege life with the need to keep spirits high. They relied on rousing speeches, ritualistic prayers, and shared meals to foster a sense of camaraderie. It was a delicate dance, one that could easily tip into despair if not carefully managed. But let's not forget the real kicker. The siege wasn't just a battle of minds, it was a battle of stomachs too. Starvation was a constant threat, and as supplies dwindled, desperation set in. The siege of Jerusalem saw defenders resorting to eating whatever they could scavenge, a grim testament to the lengths humans will go to survive. And as the siege dragged on, the lines between right and wrong began to blur. Soldiers on both sides committed atrocities, driven by desperation and the dehumanizing effects of prolonged conflict. It's a sobering reminder that in war, morality is often the first casualty. Yet, despite the darkness, there were moments of humanity, tales of temporary truces, where enemies set aside their weapons to share food or trade stories, offer a glimmer of hope amidst the bleakness. These brief respites were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the depths of despair, compassion could still find a way to shine through. As night falls on your siege tower, you're left with a sobering thought. Warfare, then as now, is as much about the mind as it is about the sword. The psychological toll of siege warfare was as devastating as any weapon, a relentless assault on the senses that left deep, lasting scars. And as you hunker down for another restless night, you gain a newfound appreciation for the mental fortitude required to endure such an ordeal. So, as you lie awake listening to the creaks and groans of the tower around you, take a moment to reflect on the true cost of siege warfare. It's a tale of endurance and resilience, of human frailty and strength, a story that resonates across the ages. And while the legends may speak of glory and valor, the reality is a far more complex tapestry, woven with threads of fear, hope, and the indomitable will to survive. As you drift into another restless night, it's time to consider what comes after the chaos, because what goes up in a siege tower must eventually come down, one way or another. Whether the siege ends in triumph or tragic defeat, the aftermath is where history's real drama unfolds. Let's face it, the battlefield might be where legends are born, but the closing act is where kingdoms can rise or fall. Picture this. It's the morning after a successful siege. The gates have been battered down, and the victors spill into the conquered castle like a medieval Black Friday sale. But what's the prize? Plunder, my friend. Gold, jewels, livestock. Anything not nailed down becomes fair game. For the soldiers who risked life and limb, this is the payoff, the medieval equivalent of a Christmas bonus. Yet this sudden rush of wealth is as fleeting as it is exhilarating. For every soldier striking it rich, there are 10 more left with memories and scars instead of spoils. But let's talk about the real winners here. The commanders and nobles who orchestrated the siege. They're not just counting treasures, they're counting political capital. Control of a castle means control of the surrounding lands, which translates into taxes and resources. It's like landing boardwalk in a medieval game of Monopoly. But there's a twist, because maintaining that new territory costs a fortune. Fortifying defenses, managing the local populace, and appeasing any grumbling vassals can quickly drain the coffers. In fact, the cost of a successful siege could rival the GDP of a small kingdom. Consider the siege of Acre in the late 12th century. The expense nearly bankrupted King Richard the Lionheart, leaving him as cash-strapped as a gamble-happy Vegas tourist. And what of the conquered? For the vanquished, the aftermath is a cocktail of displacement, despair, and in many cases, destitution. The castle's former inhabitants often face a grim fate, ranging from enslavement to exile. The local population, too, bears the brunt. Famine and poverty spread like a medieval plague as fields lay fallow and trade routes falter. The social fabric gets torn apart, leaving communities reeling for generations. It's like the medieval version of a tornado ripping through town, except the only insurance is divine intervention. The economic fallout isn't just local. It ripples out, affecting entire regions. Trade networks that relied on the besieged city collapse, causing economic shockwaves felt far beyond the castle walls. Suddenly, the price of wheat skyrockets, and merchants wring their hands over disrupted supplies. It's a medieval supply chain crisis, one that could send a kingdom into economic tailspin. The siege of Constantinople in 1204 is a prime example, leaving the Byzantine Empire in tatters and reshaping the political landscape of Europe. Yet, let's not forget the other side of the coin. Failed sieges are their own kind of catastrophe. Imagine pouring resources into a siege only to retreat in humiliation. It's not just a military defeat, it's a PR nightmare. The besieging army slinks away, their morale as shattered as their siege engines, while the defenders celebrate their hard-won survival. The failed siege of Vienna in 1529 saw the mighty Ottoman Empire turn tail, leaving them with a bruised ego and a lighter treasury. For the besiegers, failure can mean more than just a loss of face. It can spell financial ruin. After all, those towering siege engines don't come cheap. We're talking about the equivalent of tens of thousands of today's dollars wasted, with nothing to show but broken timber and dashed hopes. A failed siege could leave a kingdom financially crippled, forcing rulers to levy harsh taxes or seek loans with the interest rate of a loan shark. And let's debunk a myth while we're at it, the notion of the noble siege. While tales of chivalrous knights and gallant stands make for thrilling bedtime stories, the truth is far less romantic. Sieges were brutal, drawn-out ordeals marked by suffering and savagery. The notion of honor got muddied in the trenches, where survival often meant making hard, morally grey choices. Starvation, disease, and the stench of death were constants, reminding everyone that glory came at a steep price. In the grand tapestry of history, sieges left indelible marks on the social and political landscape. They were the crucible in which power dynamics shifted, where the fates of nations were decided. Yet they also revealed the stark realities of human nature, our capacity for both resilience and cruelty, for hope and despair. Each siege was a story etched into the annals of time, a testament to the complexities and contradictions of the medieval world. As you lie back in your wooden fortress, reflecting on these harsh truths, you realize that siege warfare was a microcosm of medieval life itself, a blend of ambition and desperation, strategy and survival. It's a tale of human folly and tenacity, where the line between hero and villain blurs in the fog of war. So, as the siege tower creaks around you, remember that the stories history tells are never as simple as they seem. They're messy, they're complex, and they're endlessly fascinating, just like the people who lived them. In the bustling markets and dusty alleyways of 10th century Persia, a young boy with an insatiable curiosity and a mind like a steel trap was making a name for himself. Enter Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Abd Allah ibn Sina, or as we like to call him, Ibn Sina, because who has time for a name that long? This kid wasn't just your average bookworm. He was the kind of prodigy who could make even modern child geniuses look like they were still figuring out how to tie their shoelaces. Now, Ibn Sina was born in 980 CE in Afshana, a small village in the Samanid Empire, which would be somewhere around modern-day Uzbekistan. The Samanids, let me tell you, were an interesting lot, a dynasty of Persian descent that ruled over a mix of cultures and languages, like a medieval version of a pop band's world tour. They were patrons of the arts and sciences, creating a vibrant intellectual hub in Bukhara, their capital, where scholars came to exchange ideas like traders swapping spices. Our young Ibn Sina was a boy wonder, allegedly memorizing the entire Quran by the age of 10. Now, let's pause here for a reality check. Memorizing such a complex text is impressive, but the story sounds like something a proud uncle might embellish at a family gathering. Still, it's widely accepted that Ibn Sina was exceptionally bright, a kid who probably corrected his tutors on their own subjects. He quickly moved on to studying logic, mathematics, and the basic sciences, soaking up knowledge like a sponge in a monsoon. As he grew, it became clear that Ibn Sina wasn't just a precocious child. He was a full-blown intellectual force. By the age of 16, he was already practicing medicine. Yes, you heard that right, 16. While most teens today are busy mastering the art of the perfect selfie, Ibn Sina was diagnosing illnesses and prescribing treatments with the confidence of a seasoned doctor. His medical education was largely self-taught, which either makes him a genius or just really stubborn. But given his later achievements, let's go with genius. The political backdrop of Ibn Sina's time was as complex and shifting as a Game of Thrones plotline, minus the dragons, and with a lot more bureaucracy. The Samanid Empire was a wealthy and powerful Persian dynasty, but it was also a hotbed of political intrigue. There were power struggles, assassinations, and enough backstabbing to make a soap opera scriptwriter blush. Yet, amid all this chaos, the Samanids were great patrons of learning, which meant that despite the political machinations, scholars like Ibn Sina had the freedom to study and innovate. The legend of Ibn Sina's childhood brilliance is peppered with anecdotes that are more than a little suspect. For instance, there's the tale of how he cured the emir of Bukhara of an illness that baffled all the other doctors, at the tender age of 18. It's a great story, right? almost too good to be true. But whether or not he really saved the day, what's undeniable is that Ibn Sina's reputation as a medical genius was cemented early on. As he navigated the murky waters of court politics, Ibn Sina's academic pursuits didn't skip a beat. He wrote his first book at 21, because apparently he didn't believe in taking a gap year. His works covered everything from philosophy to astronomy, and he was known to debate with scholars twice his age, who probably wished they'd stayed in bed that day. Ibn Sina's early life is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most brilliant minds come from the most unassuming places. The Sassanian Empire, with all its grandeur and corruption, somehow provided the perfect storm for nurturing a polymath who would go on to become a cornerstone of early medicine. But as we dive deeper into his life, we'll see that Ibn Sina wasn't just a product of his time. He was a force of nature, propelling himself into the annals of history with a mixture of intellect, ambition, and just a touch of youthful audacity. And so, our boy wonder Ibn Sina navigated the labyrinth of medieval politics with the finesse of a chess grandmaster, all while laying the groundwork for what would become his magnum opus, the canon of medicine. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to appreciate what it meant to produce a book in the 11th century. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just a stroll to the nearest medieval Kinkos. Back in Ibn Sina's day, a book wasn't just a collection of words. It was a luxury item, akin to a Rolex or a Tesla today. Each manuscript was painstakingly handwritten, and here's a fun fact. A single book could take several months or even years to complete. Imagine writing your next novel longhand, and then imagine doing it all by candlelight, with quills that had a mind of their own. Now that's dedication. The economic realities of manuscript production were, shall we say, less than ideal. Skilled scribes were the rock stars of their time, and they didn't come cheap. The cost of materials, not just the parchment, but also the inks and binding, meant that owning a book was the medieval equivalent of owning beachfront property. And let's not forget the risk of human error. Without spell check, any slip of the quill could turn a scholarly treatise into an unintentional comedy. Imagine the canon of medicine advising you to eat more cats instead of carrots, a typo that could make for a very different kind of medical breakthrough. Now, Ibn Sina wasn't just scribbling down his thoughts in a vacuum. His canon of medicine was a masterful synthesis of all existing medical knowledge, from ancient Greek texts to contemporary Islamic scholarship. We're talking about a 5-volume work that covered everything from anatomy to pharmacology to, yes, diet and hygiene. This wasn't just a medical manual. It was the Google of its time, a comprehensive database you could actually hold in your hands. The canon's influence was nothing short of seismic. It spread like wildfire across the Islamic world and beyond, eventually becoming a staple in European universities. We're talking about a book so influential that it was used as a medical textbook for over 600 years. Let that sink in for a moment. That's longer than the United States has been a country. It was translated into Latin in the 12th century, and by the Renaissance, it was as essential as oxygen to any serious medical student. But why did the canon of medicine endure when so many other works have faded into obscurity? Well, for starters, Ibn Sina's approach was incredibly holistic. He didn't just focus on symptoms. He emphasized the importance of understanding the underlying causes of disease. This was a radical shift from the more simplistic, cure what ails you mentality that prevailed at the time. He also stressed the significance of diet and environment on health, ideas that feel downright modern in their prescience. But let's not romanticize things too much. Yes, the canon was groundbreaking, but it wasn't infallible. Ibn Sina, like everyone else back then, believed in the humoral theory of medicine. That's the one where your health depends on the balance of bodily fluids, which sounds like something a medieval mixologist might concoct. And while this theory was eventually debunked, it was the best science of the time. Even geniuses have to work with the tools they're given. The logistics of disseminating Ibn Sina's work were as complex as the Silk Road trade routes. Each manuscript had to be copied by hand, which meant that errors could, and did, creep in. The more popular a work became, the higher the likelihood of variations in the text. Picture a game of telephone played out over centuries, where heart might become heart, and suddenly you're reading about the anatomy of a deer instead of a human. Yet, despite these hurdles, the canon survived and thrived. a testament to both its brilliance and the tenacity of those who believed in its value. Interestingly, the appeal of Ibn Sina's work wasn't just limited to the Muslim world. His writings found eager audiences in Europe, where they were absorbed and integrated into the burgeoning medical schools of the Middle Ages. This cross-cultural exchange wasn't just a one-way street. It laid the groundwork for future collaborations and advancements. It's a reminder that knowledge knows no borders, even when political and religious divides loom large. As we delve deeper into Ibn Sina's life and works, it's clear that his legacy is both a product of its time and a beacon for the future. The canon of medicine isn't just a relic of the past. It's a symbol of the enduring power of human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of understanding. So, while Ibn Sina may have been working in an era without the conveniences of modern technology, his insights continue to resonate, reminding us that the quest for knowledge is a timeless endeavor. While Ibn Sina's canon of medicine was busy rewriting the rulebooks of healthcare as we knew them, or didn't know them in this case, our man wasn't just lounging around basking in his own brilliance. Nope, he was knee-deep in the political cesspool of the Persian courts, doing what any self-respecting genius does, trying not to get his head chopped off. You see, being a court physician in 11th century Persia was less about curing ailments and more about navigating egos the size of small kingdoms. And don't get me started on the drama. Think of it as Grey's Anatomy meets House of Cards. Ibn Sina's career as a court physician was as tumultuous as a soap opera marathon. He served various rulers, each with their own set of quirks, and let's not sugarcoat it, a penchant for intrigue that would make Machiavelli blush. One such ruler was the Buyid Prince Shams al-Dawla, a man with a title like that was bound to have a few skeletons in his closet, and Ibn Sina had to play his cards right to avoid joining them. Now, let's dive into one of the more bizarre chapters of his life. Ibn Sina narrowly dodged execution over a medical mishap that involved a peacock. Yes, you heard right, a peacock. You can't make this stuff up. Apparently, Shams al-Dawla had an ailment that Ibn Sina diagnosed and treated with his usual flair. But when the prince's condition didn't improve, the blame game began, and Ibn Sina found himself in the crosshairs. Somewhere along the line, a prescription involving peacock meat was either misunderstood or misapplied, leading to a royal tantrum of epic proportions. It's unclear whether the peacock was supposed to be a cure or a garnish, but in the high-stakes world of medieval Persian politics, such details could be a matter of life and death. The situation was tense enough to make Ibn Sina consider fleeing, but his silver tongue, probably more polished than the finest Persian silverware, saved the day. He managed to convince the prince that the misunderstanding was merely a trivial mishap in the grand scheme of his otherwise stellar medical track record. Talk about dodging a bullet, or in this case, a scimitar. But why was Ibn Sina, a doctor with a rep so golden it could be mistaken for a bullion, embroiled in such perilous politics? Well, welcome to the Byzantine world of Persian court life, where alliances shifted faster than the sands of the Karakum Desert. The Buyids, the dynasty Ibn Sina found himself entangled with, were the puppet masters behind the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad. They wielded power like a double-edged sword, and if you were caught on the wrong side, let's just say you'd wish you'd studied accountancy instead of medicine. Ibn Sina's knack for surviving these treacherous waters was nothing short of legendary. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a diplomat, a negotiator, and when necessary, a master of the disappearing act. His ability to stay one step ahead of the axe was matched only by his relentless pursuit of knowledge. It's worth noting that while he was charming his way out of death sentences, he was also continuing his scholarly work, writing over 450 treatises on subjects ranging from philosophy to astronomy. His ability to thrive in such a cutthroat environment begs the question, was Ibn Sina a product of his time, or was he a timeless genius simply playing the hand he was dealt? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. The political chaos of his era provided both a backdrop and a crucible for his talents to shine. After all, necessity is the mother of invention, or in Ibn Sina's case, the mother of survival skills. Now, let's not pretend Ibn Sina was some kind of saint. He was a man of his time, which meant playing politics like a grandmaster. His alliances were often forged out of necessity rather than loyalty, a strategy that kept him alive, but also earned him a few enemies along the way. But can you blame him? When your neck is on the line, literally, allegiance becomes a flexible concept. Despite the precariousness of his situation, Ibn Sina's influence continued to grow. His medical expertise was sought after by rulers across the Islamic world, and his philosophical musings challenged and inspired scholars from Cordoba to Baghdad. This wasn't just about personal survival. It was about leaving a legacy that would outlast the fleeting whims of political patrons. As we dig deeper into his escapades, one can't help but marvel at his audacity. Ibn Sina was a man who dared to think differently in an age when conformity was often the safer path. His life was a series of calculated risks, each one a testament to his unyielding quest for knowledge and understanding. Whether he was debating with scholars, writing treatises, or sweet-talking his way out of a death sentence, Ibn Sina remained steadfast in his pursuit of truth and wisdom. So, what can we take away from this chapter of Ibn Sina's life? Perhaps it's the realization that genius is as much about adaptability as it is about intellect. In the unpredictable world of the Persian courts, Ibn Sina's ability to pivot and thrive was as crucial as his medical prowess. His story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest minds not only illuminate the path ahead, but also navigate the darkness with a deftness that leaves us in awe. As we move forward in our exploration of Ibn Sina's life, we'll see that his escapades as a court physician were just one facet of a multifaceted legacy. The next act of this saga promises more intrigue, more drama, and yes, more peacocks. Stay tuned, because if there's one thing we've learned about Ibn Sina, it's that his story is anything but predictable. But let's shift gears from the high-stakes drama of Persian court politics to the cerebral arena of philosophy, where Ibn Sina's legacy really flexes its muscles. This wasn't just a guy who could talk his way out of a beheading. He was also busy redefining philosophical thought in ways that would ripple through the ages. Imagine the philosophical landscape of the Islamic Golden Age as a bustling bazaar of ideas, where scholars haggled over metaphysical concepts like they were bargaining for the best price on saffron. And at the center of it all, Ibn Sina, the intellectual merchant with a stall that seemed irresistibly alluring. Now, let's debunk a little myth while we're at it. The idea that Ibn Sina single-handedly invented modern philosophy while lounging in a bathhouse is about as realistic as claiming he discovered Wi-Fi while taking a camel ride. Sure, he loved a good soap. Who doesn't? But his contributions were the result of relentless study, debate, and the occasional heated exchange that might have singed a few egos along the way. His magnum opus, the Book of Healing, and some leisurely weekend project. It was a sprawling philosophical encyclopedia that tackled everything from logic to ethics to metaphysics. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of philosophical treatises. Ibn Sina's philosophical work was deeply rooted in the tradition of Greek philosophy, particularly the works of Aristotle. But he wasn't just a copycat. He was more like a remix artist, taking the best beats from Aristotle and adding his own unique flair. He delved into the nature of the soul, the existence of God, and the mechanics of the universe with a curiosity that could rival any modern-day scientist. His Floating Man thought experiment, for instance, was a mind-bending exploration into human consciousness that would make even Descartes raise an eyebrow. But here's the kicker. Ibn Sina's ideas didn't just stay within the cozy confines of the Islamic world. They were like intellectual contraband, smuggled across borders and finding their way into the heart of the Western Renaissance. His works were translated into Latin, and before you knew it, European scholars were quoting him like he was the Socrates of the East. Talk about cross-cultural pollination. While the Western world was still trying to figure out what to do with Aristotle, Ibn Sina had already taken those ideas for a test drive and upgraded them with a philosophical turbocharger. One of the more entertaining aspects of Ibn Sina's philosophical journey was his debates with contemporaries. Picture this. A room full of intellectual heavyweights, with Ibn Sina holding court like a philosophical Muhammad Ali, floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. These debates weren't just about dry logic. They often featured witty exchanges that would bring a smile to even the most stoic of scholars. There's a tale of a particularly lively debate with the famed philosopher Al-Biruni, where the two intellectual titans sparred over the nature of eternity. It was like watching a chess match, where both players were secretly trying to outdo each other in verbal jabs. While Ibn Sina's philosophical achievements are celebrated, it's important to remember the economic and social contexts that allowed such vibrant intellectual pursuits to thrive. The Islamic Golden Age was a period of remarkable prosperity, with trade routes stretching from the Alhambra in Spain to the bustling markets of Baghdad. This wealth fueled cultural and scientific advancements, creating an environment where scholars like Ibn Sina could flourish. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, for instance, was the Silicon Valley of its day, a place where the best minds gathered to push the boundaries of knowledge. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The reality was that philosophical inquiry in Ibn Sina's time was often a perilous endeavor. There were political and religious factions that viewed certain ideas with suspicion, and stepping too far out of line could result in accusations of heresy. Never a good look when the penalty might involve a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Ibn Sina, with his penchant for challenging orthodox views, had to tread carefully, like a tightrope walker balancing over a chasm of dogma. Despite these challenges, Ibn Sina's philosophical works left an indelible mark on both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. His writings on metaphysics, particularly the concept of the necessary existent, a cornerstone in Islamic theology, were groundbreaking. He argued for a God who was not just a creator, but an essential being whose existence was logically necessary. This wasn't just theological musing. It was a philosophical game-changer that influenced thinkers for centuries. As we wade deeper into the intellectual currents of Ibn Sina's era, it's clear that his impact was as much about the questions he raised as it was about the answers he provided. He was the kind of thinker who could turn a simple question into a labyrinth of inquiry, challenging his peers to rethink their assumptions and explore new horizons. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of understanding, a reminder that the quest for knowledge is a journey with no final destination, just endless paths to explore. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Ibn Sina's philosophical contributions, let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity of his intellect and the boldness of his vision. He was a thinker who dared to imagine a world beyond the confines of his time, a world where ideas could transcend borders and enrich the human experience. And while he may not have invented philosophy in a bathhouse, he certainly left a legacy that continues to ripple through the ages, challenging us to think deeper, question harder, and never settle for the easy answers. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Ibn Sina's life promises even more intrigue, with a few surprises that will keep us on the edge of our intellectual seats. And so, as we unwind the last chapter of Ibn Sina's storied life, let's face it, the guy was the original overachiever. By the time he shuffled off this mortal coil in 1037, he'd left a legacy so sprawling it makes the Marvel cinematic universe look like a high school play. Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, as the cool kids in Europe would later call him, wasn't just a physician or a philosopher. He was the kind of polymath who could juggle metaphysics, medicine, and a political career without breaking a sweat. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. For all his brilliance, he was still very much human, complete with flaws and challenges that would make any modern-day protagonist relatable. First, let's tackle the myth of Ibn Sina as a Renaissance man before the Renaissance. It's a catchy title, and sure, it fits nicely on a bumper sticker, but it's not entirely accurate. The Renaissance was characterized by a revival of classical learning, and while Ibn Sina definitely did his homework on the Greeks, he wasn't just regurgitating Aristotle and Plato. He was building on their ideas, remixing the classics with an Islamic twist and adding his own insights. His work was as much about innovation as it was about preservation. So, was he a Renaissance man? Perhaps not in the strictest sense, but he was certainly a man ahead of his time, straddling the line between tradition and innovation like a philosophical tightrope walker. Now, let's pivot to the man behind the myth. Ibn Sina wasn't just a floating head of intellect. He had his share of very human struggles. For one, he was reportedly quite the hedonist. It's said he indulged in the pleasures of life with a zeal that would make even a rock star raise an eyebrow. Whether it was the heady aroma of aged wine or the company of charming companions, Ibn Sina wasn't above enjoying the finer things. This penchant for indulgence likely contributed to his eventual demise. He passed away at the comparatively young age of 57, a victim of what many historians suspect was a gastrointestinal disorder, exacerbated by a lifestyle that prioritized pleasure over prudence. But let's not judge the man too harshly for enjoying a good party. His life was a whirlwind of political intrigue and intellectual exploration, and perhaps a little escapism was just what the doctor ordered, literally. It's easy to romanticize his achievements, to put him on a pedestal so high it practically reaches the heavens. Yet, it's crucial to remember that Ibn Sina was as fallible as the next person. His writings, while groundbreaking, were not without errors. As mentioned before, he subscribed to the humoral theory of medicine, a concept that today seems as outdated as a flip phone. But this was the cornerstone of medical understanding in his time, and he worked within the constraints of the knowledge available to him. So, what's the takeaway from Ibn Sina's multifaceted life? For starters, his influence on medicine is undeniable. The canon of medicine wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was the medical Bible for centuries, shaping practices from the Islamic world to the heart of Europe. But his impact stretched beyond the realm of medicine. His philosophical musings laid the groundwork for centuries of debate and exploration, influencing everyone from Thomas Aquinas to René Descartes. And let's not forget his contributions to fields like astronomy and chemistry, where he also left his mark. It's as if Ibn Sina took a look at the boundaries of human knowledge and thought, why not push them a little further? In the end, Ibn Sina's legacy is one of relentless curiosity and intellectual daring. He was a man unafraid to question the status quo, to explore ideas that others might shy away from. His life was a tapestry woven with threads of genius, audacity, and yes, a bit of human frailty. Today, in a world where information is at our fingertips and knowledge knows no bounds, Ibn Sina's story serves as a reminder of the power of inquiry. It urges us to embrace our curiosity, to challenge ourselves, and to seek understanding in a world that often feels as complex as the medieval courts he once navigated. So, as we close the book on Ibn Sina, let's not just remember him as a figure of the past. Let's see him as a beacon for the future, a testament to the enduring power of human potential. His life was a journey through the realms of the known and the unknown, a dance between light and shadow, science and philosophy. And while the man himself may have left the stage centuries ago, the echoes of his footsteps continue to reverberate through the corridors of time, inspiring us to ask questions, to seek answers, and to never stop learning. Because in the grand theater of history, that's the legacy that truly stands the test of time. You wake up to a Neolithic morning, where your alarm clock is the sunlight squeezing through the gaps in your thatched roof. Forget the snooze button. It's time to rise and shine, because today you're diving into the world of ancient pottery making. Before you can even brew a cup of coffee, assuming you've somehow invented it, you're already elbow deep in a world where clay is king and your creativity is the only limit. First things first, you need clay, the lifeblood of your Neolithic artistic ambitions. Locating clay isn't just about picking up a bag from the local craft store. Instead, you head down to a nearby riverbank. You're on the lookout for a specific kind of mud, the slick, sticky stuff that makes your feet squelch as you walk. This isn't your ordinary dirt. It's the fine-grained sediment that has been deposited by rivers over hundreds of years. You're essentially shopping for ancient geological leftovers, if we're being precise. And we are, because it's the Neolithic era. You want clay chock full of minerals like iron and magnesium. These give it that rich, earthy color palette that Instagram filters can only dream of emulating. Now, you're not just grabbing any old handful of clay. You need to knead it, work it, love it as if it were a sourdough starter. It's the OG stress ball, minus the commercial branding. The idea here is to remove all the air bubbles and any sneaky pebbles that might sabotage your masterpiece. Sure, it sounds simple. Just need the clay right. Well, tell that to your aching arms after 10 minutes of this back-breaking work. You're essentially the potter's version of a CrossFit champion, and you didn't even need to pay a monthly membership fee. Once your clay is prepped, it's time to channel your inner Neolithic artist. But wait, before you start sculpting, we'll need to gather some tools. Forget about electric wheels or precision instruments. Your toolset is more Flintstones than Jetsons. We're talking about stones, bones, and sticks. A simple flat rock might serve as your work surface, and a stray animal bone could become your sculpting tool. If you're lucky, You might even have a bit of leather or a reed to smooth out those rough edges. These tools, while rudimentary, are as high-tech as it gets in 5000 BCE. Now, let's talk pigments, because you're not just molding clay, you're creating something that screams, I was here, and I had style. Natural pigments are your go-to, and these are sourced from the earth itself. Ochre, anyone. This stuff is essentially powdered iron oxide, and it comes in a variety of shades from yellow to deep red. It's like having a pack of Crayola, minus the plastic wrapper. You might grind these minerals with a stone, mixing them with water, or even a dash of animal fat to create a paint that can withstand the test of time, or at least until the next heavy rain. As you gather your materials, let's dispel a few myths. The Neolithic era isn't just about grunting cavemen and crude tools. Sure, life was rough around the edges, but these people were innovators. They turned local resources into art and utility, and they did it with a flair that would make modern-day DIY enthusiasts envious. Pottery wasn't just decorative, it was essential. These vessels stored food, held water, and sometimes even served as the final resting place for loved ones. Yes, you heard right. Some parts were used as burial urns. Talk about multi-purpose. So with your clay and pigments ready, you're on the brink of creating something extraordinary. As you begin to shape your clay, keep in mind that every piece tells a story, not just of the land and materials, but of the people who dared to create. Pottery is the Neolithic version of a tweet, short, impactful, and a window into the soul of its maker. But be warned, much like a tweet, once it's out there, you can't take it back. So make sure your pottery says exactly what you want it to say. And remember, this isn't just about survival. It's about leaving a mark, an indelible stamp on history, one part at a time. As you knead the clay and ponder the legacy of your Neolithic tweet, part, it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty of technique. Let's take a detour from Instagram filters and dive headfirst into the coil and slab methods, the bread and butter of Neolithic pottery. Imagine hand-rolling snakes of clay and stacking them like a prehistoric game of Jenga. That's the coil method, deceptively simple yet capable of producing vessels as sturdy as a Neolithic rock concert. It was all about stacking those coils with precision, like building a clay skyscraper one floor at a time. Each layer is smoothed and blended into the one below, erasing the seams as if they were scandalous tweets from your past. And then there's the slab method, which is less about stacking and more about assembling. Picture rolling out a slab of clay as if you're making the world's thickest pizza crust. You cut it into shapes and join these like a jigsaw puzzle, except the pieces are sticky and lack those helpful corner markers. This technique might have been the ancient equivalent of a weekend carpentry project, and while your tools might be rudimentary, the skill required was anything but. Don't let anyone tell you Neolithic folks were just fumbling around in the dark. They were the OG engineers, crafting with intention and an eye for detail. Now, why did these methods matter? It wasn't just about putting food on the table, literally. In the Neolithic economy, your ability to make durable, functional pottery could mean the difference between survival and starvation. You see, in a world without Tupperware, parts were the essential storage solution. Grain, water, even fermented beverages. These parts were the ancient pantries and liquor cabinets rolled into one. The economics of craftsmanship were all about utility. A well-made part could be traded for other necessities, making you a VIP at the local barter market. No coins, no bills, just cold, hard clay. But let's address the myth that every part was a museum-worthy masterpiece. Spoiler alert, they weren't. For every stunning piece of art, there were countless others that looked like a toddler's art project gone wrong. Pottery was as much trial and error as it was skill. Sure, some pieces ended up as family heirlooms, but many more were lucky to serve as makeshift doorstops. This wasn't about perfection, it was about practicality. You weren't aiming for the Louvre. You were aiming to not spill your precious grain all over the floor. And don't forget, this wasn't a one-person show. Pottery making was often a community affair, a social event where skills were passed down like Grandma's secret pie recipe. This wasn't just about crafting parts. It was about crafting relationships and community cohesion. You were part of a collective effort to sustain life, and every part you shaped was a testament to your place in the social fabric. Now, let's take a moment to debunk another romantic narrative. The solitary potter, lost in their craft, channeling their inner artist. In reality, pottery was often a family business, with multiple hands involved in the process. Kids might have been tasked with gathering clay or mixing pigments, while the adults handled the heavy lifting of shaping and firing. It was a division of labor that ensured efficiency and survival. Forget the lone genius. This was teamwork at its rawest form. As we roll through the morning, the sun climbing higher, the stakes of your craft become clear. This isn't just about slapping clay together. It's about creating something that fulfills a basic human need. In the Neolithic era, you couldn't just head down to the local store when you ran out of storage vessels. It was DIY or die, quite literally. The parts you made were lifelines, and every crack or imperfection could mean a loss of precious resources. It's no wonder these early parters took their craft seriously. In a world without safety nets, the ability to make a reliable part was as valuable as any modern engineering degree. So, as you continue shaping your clay, remember that each piece tells a multifaceted story. It's not just about the aesthetics, though those are certainly nice, but about the survival skills encoded within each twist and turn of the clay. It's about the economics of need, the politics of trade, and the social dynamics of shared effort. In short, it's about a world where every part mattered, not just for what it could hold, but for what it represented. And as you move towards the next phase of your pottery journey, get ready to fire things up, literally. All right, you've got your clay masterpiece ready, and now it's time to test your metal and your pottery in the fiery embrace of the kiln. But before you get too carried away imagining a state-of-the-art, stainless steel contraption, let's set the record straight. We're talking about a Neolithic kiln, which is about as far from high-tech as a sundial is from a smartwatch. These kilns were essentially pits dug into the ground or rudimentary above-ground structures made from stone and clay. They were the industrial ovens of their day, minus the digital timer. To get things cooking, you need to crank the heat up to a toasty 900 to 100 degrees Celsius, which is about the same temperature as the surface of Venus. This is where your inner pyromaniac gets to shine, or more accurately, smolder. The fuel, mostly wood, with some dried animal dung thrown in for good measure. Talk about renewable energy. The kiln is a hungry beast, demanding constant feeding and attention, lest your precious parts end up looking more like abstract art than functional vessels. Here's a fun fact. Controlling the temperature in these ancient kilns was an art form in itself. Too hot, and your part could explode like a clay grenade. Too cool, and it would crumble like a stale biscuit. It wasn't just about achieving the right temperature. It was about maintaining it long enough to ensure that your pottery didn't end up as landfill fodder. This delicate dance with fire required a keen eye and perhaps a touch of Neolithic intuition. It's like being a DJ, except instead of mixing tracks, you're mixing temperatures. Now, let's talk environmental impact. Before you start imagining a pristine Neolithic landscape untouched by human hand, consider this. The demand for fuel led to deforestation in some areas. That's right, ancient potters were among the first to face the consequences of resource depletion. It was a classic tale of supply and demand, with Mother Nature picking up the tab. Early environmentalists, not quite, but the Neolithic folks were certainly among the first to realize that their actions had a broader impact on the world around them. But don't get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. The social aspect of kiln work was its own kind of fire-fueled fiesta. Imagine a group of potters gathered around, swapping stories and techniques while keeping the flames fed. This was where the magic happened, not just the firing of parts, but the kindling of community spirit. It was a place to share knowledge, troubleshoot issues, and maybe even engage in a little friendly competition. Who could produce the most intricate design? Whose part would withstand the fiery trial without a crack? These were the water-cooler moments of the Neolithic age, although perhaps more accurately described as kiln-side chats. Quality control in this setting was less about ISO certifications and more about communal pride. If a part cracked or broke during firing, it wasn't just a personal failure, it was a community setback. You see, the reputation of a potter wasn't just in their hands, but in their parts. These items were traded, given as gifts, and used in daily life. A shoddy part was like a bad Yelp review, except it could mean the difference between eating well and going hungry. In this world, quality control was a matter of survival, not just reputation. And let's not forget the unwritten rules of the kiln. Much like any modern workplace, there were dynamics at play. Senior potters might have had first dibs on the best spots in the kiln, where the heat was just right. Apprentices would have been on wood-fetching duty, learning the ropes and earning their place in the pottery hierarchy. It was a system that worked, albeit with its own set of quirks and challenges. Forget corporate ladders. This was the clay climb, where each part fired was a rung up the ladder. So, as midday sun beats down, the kiln crackling with potential energy, you stand at the heart of this ancient workshop. You're not just crafting pottery, you're crafting community, economy, and even a bit of ecological impact. Each part that emerges from the kiln is a testament to the skill, resilience, and ingenuity of the Neolithic people. It's a reminder that while the tools and techniques may have changed, the art of pottery, much like the art of life, is about balance, precision, and a touch of daring. As the fire consumes its fuel and transforms clay, so too does this ancient process transform the people who practice it. And as the last part is removed from the kiln, it's not just a piece of pottery that emerges, but a piece of history, ready to take its place in the ongoing story of human creativity. But hold on, we're not done yet. What's next? Well, we'll need to think about decoration and distribution. How do these parts make their way into the homes and hands of others? And what does it mean to be a potter in a world where your creations are as essential as the air you breathe? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the colorful and complex tapestry of Neolithic life, where every part tells a story, and every story is a thread woven into the fabric of history. As the kiln's last fiery breath subsides, and the parts are finally cool enough to handle, it's time to examine your ceramic masterpieces. This afternoon isn't just about admiring the fruits of your labor. It's about understanding the many roles these parts will play in Neolithic life. So, what exactly are you going to do with these handcrafted marvels that have survived the kiln's fiery trial? Well, first let's look at the practicalities because, spoiler alert, Neolithic parts weren't just sitting pretty. These clay vessels were the Swiss army knives of their era, designed to meet a variety of needs, from storing grain to fermenting the next batch of ale. Yes, early humans enjoyed a tipple as much as the next person. These parts were indispensable. Consider this. A single part could hold anywhere from a few liters to over 50 liters of liquid or dry goods. That's roughly the equivalent of carting around a suitcase packed for a 2-week vacation, minus the airport fiasco. Parts were the ancient version of a pantry, fridge, and wine cellar, all rolled into one. Then there's cooking. Before the invention of the non-stick skillet, Neolithic folks had to make do with what they had, and what they had were parts sturdy enough to withstand open flames. Think of these as the original slow cookers. You could toss in some wild grains and a few chunks of meat, and let it simmer over a fire pit for hours. It was the dinner party essential, minus the awkward small talk. Cooking in clay was not just about filling bellies. It was about maximizing the nutritional value of whatever meager resources you had. It was one-part wonders before Pinterest made them trendy. Beyond the utilitarian, pottery also had its finger on the pulse of the Neolithic social scene. These parts were often decorated with intricate designs that told stories or conveyed social status. Think of it as the prehistoric equivalent of a name-brand handbag. The patterns etched into the clay could indicate tribal affiliation, achievements, or even spiritual beliefs. In this sense, pottery was a form of communication, a language without words, etched in the fire-hardened clay of daily life. Now, let's wade into the murky waters of myth to tackle the so-called magic part. Legend has it that some parts were believed to possess spiritual significance, acting as conduits to the divine or as vessels for sacred offerings. Sounds enchanting, right? Well, not so fast. While it's true that certain parts were buried with the dead, likely as offerings for the afterlife, the idea of magical properties is more about human fascination with the mystical than archaeological evidence. It's a classic case of wishful thinking meeting the hard realities of limited historical data. Why did these myths arise? Well, in a world that was often unpredictable and harsh, the idea that an object could hold mystical power was comforting. It was a way for people to exert control over the uncontrollable, crops, weather, life, and death. But just because people believed something didn't make it true. The allure of the magic part is less about the part, and more about the people who needed to believe in its power. It's an ancient echo of the human need for hope and security in a precarious world. And let's not overlook the economic implications of pottery in the Neolithic era. In a society where currency had yet to be invented, goods like parts were traded or bartered. A well-crafted part could be exchanged for food, clothing, or other staples. In this sense, pottery was a form of currency, a tangible asset that held value in the community. The economics of pottery making were as much about survival as they were about artistry. But not every part was a masterpiece. Some were the equivalent of a dollar store find, functional but far from fancy. These were the parts that didn't quite make the grade, the ones that ended up as makeshift doorstops or were relegated to the back of the storage hut. It's a reminder that even in the Neolithic age, not all that glitters is gold, or in this case, not all that's fired is fabulous. And as you ponder the multifaceted roles of these parts, remember that they are more than just artifacts. They are the fingerprints of an ancient civilization. Each one tells a story of resourcefulness, creativity, and the relentless drive to adapt and survive. They are a testament to the ingenuity of people who made the most out of the materials at their disposal, crafting not just objects, but a way of life. So, as you hold a part in your hands, feel the weight of history. It's not just a piece of fired clay, it's a tangible connection to the past. One that speaks volumes about the people who crafted it and the world they inhabited. And as the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over this Neolithic landscape, know that the story of pottery is far from finished. It's a narrative as enduring as the parts themselves, waiting to be explored and understood, one fired vessel at a time. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of Neolithic life, where every part holds a secret, every pattern a story, and every myth a kernel of truth waiting to be unearthed. As the sun bows out with a golden Angkor, painting the Neolithic landscape in hues that would make even Monet jealous, it's time to reflect on the day's journey through the world of ancient pottery. We've been elbow-deep in clay, spinning tales of survival and creativity as timeless as the earth itself. So, what's the takeaway from this day steeped in history and mud? Well, grab your metaphorical time-traveling passport, because we're about to put these ancient parts into a broader context that might just reshape how you view their role in society. First off, let's talk trade. In a time when Amazon Prime was a few millennia away, the humble part was a key player in the commerce game. These vessels traveled great distances, acting as the silent diplomats of their era. Imagine a part filled with grain, traveling hundreds of miles. Okay, maybe not on a direct flight, but through a series of trades, like a relay race with goods instead of batons. Archaeologists have found Neolithic pottery in places far removed from their point of origin, evidence that trade networks were as complex as those ancient patterns etched into their surfaces. This was the Silk Road before the Silk Road, except instead of luxurious fabrics, you had parts of all shapes and sizes, each one carrying a bit of its maker's world with it. And these trade networks weren't just about shifting goods, they were the internet of their day, a web of connections that allowed for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and even culture. Picture this. A part made in one region might feature designs or techniques borrowed from another, a tangible reminder that even in antiquity, humans were great at cultural appropriation. But more than that, these parts were a form of communication, a way to share stories and signify alliances. Each trade was a handshake across time and space, a testament to the human spirit's ability to reach out and connect. But with trade came politics. In a world where every part had a story to tell, the control of pottery production and distribution was no small affair. Pottery-making centers could wield significant influence, not just economically, but also politically. These were the industrial hubs of their day, where control over resources translated to power. Think of them as the Silicon Valleys of the Neolithic era, minus the tech billionaires, but full of entrepreneurial spirit. The ability to produce and trade high-quality pottery could elevate a community's status, turning it into a central node in the web of Neolithic society. Let's debunk another myth while we're at it, the idea that these societies were primitive in their politics. Sure, they didn't have formal governments or written laws, but they operated with systems of governance that rivaled anything you'd see in a modern boardroom. Decisions about trade routes, resource allocation, and even pottery designs were likely made by consensus or through complex social negotiations. Power wasn't just about who had the biggest club. It was about who could navigate the intricate dance of diplomacy and trade. And as these parts moved from hand to hand, they carried with them not just goods, but also promises and obligations. You see, each trade was a contract, a binding agreement that involved a level of trust and mutual benefit. It was the original handshake deal, sealed not with a signature, but with the clink of ceramic. This was politics at its most elemental, a world where every part was a political statement, a declaration of intent, and a testament to human ingenuity. Now, let's shift gears and delve into the social fabric that these parts wove. Pottery wasn't just about function and trade. It was a cornerstone of community identity. The designs etched into their surfaces were more than just decoration. They were cultural signatures, a visual language that spoke volumes about the people who crafted them. Each motif was a chapter in the story of a community, a way to assert identity and heritage in a world where oral tradition was the primary form of storytelling. Think of it as social media in clay form. Parts were a way to broadcast status, achievements, and even personal milestones. A particularly elaborate part might have been the equivalent of a viral post, admired and envied by many. These vessels were artifacts of social status, and owning a particularly fine piece of pottery could elevate one's standing in the community. It was the Neolithic bling, a status symbol that spoke of wealth, skill, and connection. But let's not romanticize it too much. The harsh reality is that many parts were utilitarian, plain, and unadorned, workhorses of the Neolithic kitchen that rarely saw the light of ceremonial day. These were the unsung heroes, the parts that did the heavy lifting, while their more glamorous counterparts basked in the limelight of trade and ceremony. In a way, they reflect the dichotomy of human society itself, a spectrum that spans the mundane and the magnificent, the everyday and the extraordinary. So, what's the legacy of these ancient artisans? Well, look around. Pottery laid the groundwork for the complex societies that followed. It was a catalyst for innovation, a trigger for trade, and a medium for expression. In their hands, clay was transformed from mere earth into vessels that carried the weight of culture and commerce. Their legacy is etched not just in museums, but in the very fabric of human progress. As the evening shadows grow long and the echoes of ancient kilns fade into the night, remember that each part is a chapter in the story of humanity. They are relics of resilience, testaments to the creativity and adaptability that define us. These parts are time capsules, holding within their curves and lines the secrets of a world that shaped the one we inhabit today. So, as you drift off into sleep, let your dreams be filled with the stories those ancient parts would tell if they could. Tales of trade and transformation, of politics and pottery, of a time when clay was king, and every part was a piece of the human puzzle. Because in the end, the story of Neolithic pottery isn't just about clay, it's about us. Chandragupta Maurya didn't just wake up one morning and decide to found an empire, but if he had, it might have been the most productive morning routine in history. We're talking an empire that spanned over 5 million square kilometers, stretching from the jagged peaks of the Himalayas to the lush plains of the Deccan Plateau. That's a lot of land, folks, but let's not get lost in the sheer size of it all and forget the bigger picture. This wasn't just about playing real-life Monopoly. Chandragupta was about to show the world how to build an empire that was as much about economic brilliance as it was about territorial domination. Now, let's talk about the brains behind the operation. Enter Cordelia, also known as Chanakya, the man with a plan. Think of him as the Yoda to Chandragupta's Luke Skywalker, but instead of lightsabers, they wielded tax systems and political strategies. Cordelia authored the Arthashastra, a treatise on statecraft, economic policy, and military strategy that makes Machiavelli's The Prince look like a bedtime story. He orchestrated a tax system so efficient that it would make modern accountants green with envy. We're talking land taxes, trade tariffs, and even tolls on roads and waterways. If you were making money in the Mauryan Empire, Cordelia made sure the state got a slice of the pie. The Mauryan economy wasn't just about squeezing the populace dry, though. It was about smart investments. They had state-run industries producing textiles, mining, and metalwork. The state acted like a savvy venture capitalist, investing in enterprises that would keep the empire's coffers full and its people employed. This wasn't just governance. It was an economic masterclass centuries before anyone thought to write economics for dummies. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the whole affair. The Mauryan bureaucracy was a bit of a behemoth, employing a vast network of officials to keep the empire ticking over. It was a bit like the world's first corporate machine, complete with its own brand of red tape. Every region had its own set of governors, tax collectors, and even spies to ensure that no one was skimming off the top. This was a well-oiled machine, albeit one that occasionally needed a bit of grease. Chandragupta himself was no slouch in the political arena. He was a master of alliances and knew when to strike and when to hold back. One of his most notable moves was aligning with Seleucus I Nikeda, one of Alexander the Great's successors. Instead of battling it out for supremacy, Chandragupta traded some elephants, yes, elephants for a chunk of territory in the west. Talk about a savvy deal. And they say elephants never forget, which probably came in handy when they needed to remember which side was theirs in a fight. His rise to power wasn't just about creating a massive empire. It was about establishing a new order. Before the Mauryan Empire, the Indian subcontinent was a patchwork of rival kingdoms, each with its own ambitions and rivalries. Chandragupta's unification of these territories wasn't just a land grab. It was the creation of a centralized administration that could maintain peace and order across vast distances. By doing so, he laid the groundwork for a stable society that could focus on growth, culture, and innovation rather than constant warfare. Despite the romantic lure of a grand empire, let's not kid ourselves about the harsh realities. The Mauryan Empire was, like any massive bureaucratic machine, prone to corruption and inefficiency. There were those who saw the empire as a cash cow to be milked for personal gain. But Chandragupta and his successors were nothing if not resilient, constantly working to tighten controls and maintain the integrity of the system. It's easy to get caught up in the glamour of empire building, but the Mauryan Empire wasn't just about power and prestige. It was about creating a legacy that would influence the Indian subcontinent for centuries to come. Chandragupta's vision and Corelia's intellect combined to create a state that wasn't just powerful, but sustainable, a feat that many a modern nation would do well to emulate. And there you have it, the beginnings of the Mauryan Empire, a story of economic savvy, political genius, and a bit of good old-fashioned empire building. It's a tale that shows us that while the allure of power might be eternal, it takes more than just ambition to create something that lasts. So, next time you're grumbling about taxes, spare a thought for the Mauryan Empire, where tax systems were an art form, and running a sprawling empire was all in a day's work. And speaking of running empires, let's talk about Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor who went from battlefield butcher to spiritual sage. This guy's story has more twists than a Bollywood thriller. Picture the scene. It's 261 BCE, and Ashoka's just finished painting the town, or more accurately, the kingdom of Kalinga, red. The Kalinga War was brutal, leaving about 100,000 soldiers dead, and another 150,000 displaced. If there were Oscars for historical carnage, Ashoka would have been a shoo-in for Best Director of Mayhem. But here's the plot twist. Ashoka, the very man who orchestrated this bloodbath, suddenly decides he's had enough of the whole crushing enemy's gig. In a move as unexpected as your grumpy cat embracing a puppy, Ashoka flips the script. Confronted by the sheer horror of the aftermath, he has an epiphany that would make even the most cynical philosopher pause. Ashoka decides to trade his sword for a set of Buddhist teachings. Yep, he goes from warlord to the monk-in-chief, embracing non-violence like it's the new black. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not talking about a guy who just got a bit misty-eyed and moved on. Ashoka's transformation was about as subtle as a rock concert in a library. He went all in, promoting Buddhism with the same zeal he once reserved for expanding his empire. His new mission, to spread compassion, peace, and some seriously introspective vibes across his vast dominion. It wasn't just a personal makeover. It became state policy. Ashoka's grand gesture to announce his newfound peace-loving persona, carving edicts on rocks and pillars across the empire. Think of these as ancient press releases, except instead of reaching your inbox, they were set in stone, literally. These edicts, spread across modern-day India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, were the ancient equivalent of going viral. Ashoka wasn't just making a statement, he was changing the narrative. But let's not romanticize these edicts as pure altruism. Sure, they were filled with lofty ideals about kindness and moral governance, but they also served a strategic purpose. Ashoka was rebranding the Mauryan Empire. His messages, meticulously etched in stone, were a mix of genuine enlightenment and savvy propaganda. By adopting Buddhism, he wasn't just seeking inner peace. He was uniting his diverse empire under a common philosophical umbrella. It was a masterstroke of statecraft, blending idealism with political pragmatism. Ashoka's edicts covered everything from religious tolerance to social welfare. They advocated for the humane treatment of prisoners and kindness to animals, which is a far cry from the Ashoka who previously saw Kalinga as just another territory to conquer. He established hospitals for humans and animals alike, spreading the idea that the state had a duty to care for its subjects. Imagine going from the guy who raised your village to the one who builds you a clinic. Talk about a 180-degree turn. And while we're on the topic of Ashoka's transformation, let's address the myth that he was a saintly figure from the start. The romantic image of a peaceful emperor is appealing, but it's not the whole story. Before his conversion, Ashoka was known for his ruthless efficiency in dealing with dissent. In fact, he reportedly had his own brothers executed in his rise to power, hardly the stuff of saintly legends. His pivot to Buddhism was a personal redemption arc wrapped in a political strategy, not just a spiritual awakening. But here's the thing. Ashoka's adoption of Buddhism turned out to be a win-win. His commitment to Dhamma, moral law, didn't just soothe his conscience, it also stabilized the empire. By promoting non-violence and religious freedom, Ashoka managed to keep his subjects relatively content and cooperative, no small feat in a region known for its diversity and complexity. His impact didn't stop at the borders of his empire, either. Ashoka sent envoys as far as Greece and Egypt, spreading Buddhist principles and establishing diplomatic relations. He wasn't just exporting Buddhism, he was importing international goodwill. It was like the ancient world's version of soft power, and Ashoka wielded it with aplomb. Despite the romanticized image of Ashoka as the benevolent ruler, let's not ignore the fact that his empire, like any other, wasn't free from the usual pitfalls: corruption, rebellion, and the constant challenge of holding vast territories together. Ashoka's edicts might have promoted ethical governance, but enforcing them across such a sprawling empire was another matter entirely. It was a bit like trying to herd cats with a sternly worded memo. Yet, Ashoka's legacy endures. His promotion of Buddhism helped it flourish, spreading across Asia and eventually influencing cultures far beyond the Indian subcontinent. His story is a reminder that even the most hardened rulers can change their tune, swapping a legacy of violence for one of peace. It's a testament to the transformative power of belief, and a good reminder that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on the battlefield, but within the human heart. So, as we pause to reflect on Ashoka's journey from conqueror to enlightened ruler, let's not forget the duality of his legacy. He was a man of contradictions, wielding power and compassion in equal measure. And while his story might have begun in bloodshed, it ended with a message etched in stone, resonating through the ages. As we move forward in exploring the cultural achievements of the Mauryan Empire, remember this: sometimes the greatest changes start with a single, resolute decision to carve a new path. And speaking of carving new paths, let's chisel our way into the cultural and artistic feats of the Mauryan Empire, where stone wasn't just for making roads, but for crafting legacies. Picture the Great Stupa at Sanchai, magnificent dome of stone that's been standing strong since the 3rd century BCE. This isn't just a pile of rocks, folks. It's a monumental testament to Mauryan artistry and architectural prowess. At about 54 feet high and 120 feet in diameter, it's the architectural equivalent of a mic drop, a grand statement of religious devotion and imperial might. Now, let's talk about the myth of Mauryan art being all about aesthetics. Sure, the polished surfaces and intricate carvings are stunning, but were they purely artistic expressions or a bit of imperial branding? The Mauryan emperors knew that art wasn't just for the soul, it was also for the eyes of the world. They weren't just building structures, they were constructing narratives, each stone a pixel in their grand imperial image. The gleaming sandstone pillars of Ashoka, each inscribed with his edicts, were less about abstract creativity and more a calculated move in the Game of Thrones. These weren't just columns, they were political billboards, broadcasting messages of power wrapped in spiritual enlightenment. But before we get too swept away by the romance of Mauryan art, Let's ground ourselves with some hard facts. These structures weren't built on dreams alone. They were erected with some serious manpower and resources. Just imagine the logistics. The Sanchai Stupa alone required tons of stone, transported across substantial distances without the luxury of modern machinery. We're talking human and animal labor, sweat equity, and a whole lot of logistical planning. It's said that the labor force could have numbered in the thousands. The Mauryaans weren't just architects. They were project managers on a scale that would make today's CEOs blush. Economically, these monumental projects were empire-sized investments. The Mauryaans had a knack for turning cultural achievements into economic opportunities. Take the Great Stupa, for instance. It wasn't just a religious site. It became a pilgrimage hub, attracting visitors from far and wide, complete with a bustling economy of its own. Merchants, artisans, and laborers all found a place in the shadow of its dome, turning spiritual tourism into a thriving business model. But was the art itself purely Mauryan? Here's where we debunk another myth. The Mauryan style was less an isolated phenomenon and more a melting pot of influences. The empire's vast reach meant a rich tapestry of cultural inputs, from Persian stone masonry to Hellenistic artistic motifs. This was cultural fusion before the term was even invented. The Mauryans were more curators than creators, cherry-picking elements from conquered cultures and weaving them into a new artistic identity. It was like the ancient world's version of a remix, taking something old and spinning it into something uniquely theirs. Despite the grandeur, there's a gritty reality to consider: the laborers behind these masterpieces. The romantic notion of artisans lovingly crafting each stone belies the truth of hard, often back-breaking work. The Mauryan Empire, for all its cultural achievements, was still a society where the few benefited from the toil of the many. Those gleaming pillars and intricately carved stupas came at a cost, not just in resources, but in human effort. It's a reminder that the splendors of empire often stand on the shoulders of the unsung. And yet, the legacy of Mauryan art endures, not just in the stones that survived, but in the cultural echoes that ripple through time. The aesthetic principles established during this period influenced subsequent Indian art and architecture for centuries. It was a foundation upon which future dynasties would build, each adding their own layers to the cultural narrative. The Mauryans may have been the original architects, but they paved the way for an ongoing dialogue between art, empire, and identity. So, as we marvel at the Mauryan Empire's cultural and artistic feats, let's remember the complexity behind the beauty. These weren't just monuments of stone. They were monuments of ambition, vision, and a bit of strategic flair. They remind us that art can be both a form of expression and a tool of empire, a delicate dance between creation and control. And as we continue our journey through the Mauryan story, keep in mind this duality. The empire's cultural achievements were as much about projecting power as they were about preserving tradition. The Mauryans carved their legacy into history, literally, and it's a story still being told, one stone at a time. As the Mauryan Empire chiseled its legacy into stone, it also carved a niche in the annals of economic history. Let's face it, Chandragupta and his successors weren't just content with building monolithic stupas. They were busy constructing trade networks that would make even modern logistics companies green with envy. Picture the nascent Silk Road, where caravans laden with everything from spices to silk snaked across formidable terrains. This wasn't your average Sunday stroll. Folks, this was globalization before anyone had coined the term. Let's talk trade goods, shall we? The Mauryan Empire was a veritable marketplace of exotic wares. We're not just talking about the standard fare of textiles and grains. Oh no, their trade manifest read like the inventory of an ancient world's Walmart. Elephants were a hot commodity, traded like luxury vehicles of their day. And why not? They were the ultimate status symbol, a pachyderm parade on the ancient highways. If you were a ruler looking to make a statement, forget the golden chariots. An elephant was the Rolls-Royce of the ancient world, trumpeting your importance from miles away. But it wasn't all about the big-ticket items. The Mauryans dealt in spices that would have your spice rack trembling with envy. Think black pepper, cardamom, and cinnamon, seasonings that could mask the dubious flavors of ancient stews, and more importantly, preserve food in an age before refrigeration. These spices traveled thousands of miles, changing hands more often than a game of hot potato. each trader adding their own markup. It was a profitable business, and boy, did the Mauryaans know how to capitalize on it. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, pun intended, regarding logistics. Without GPS or Google Maps, how did they manage to keep these trade routes running smoothly? The answer is simple: they didn't. Imagine navigating deserts and mountain passes with nothing but the stars and a prayer. It was less about precision and more about perseverance. The Mauryaans relied on a network of rest stops, the precursors to our modern truck stops, where traders could rest, refuel, and perhaps swap a few tall tales about the bandits lurking along the way. It was all part of the adventure, or the nightmare, depending on who you ask. Coinage jingled across these trade routes like the soundtrack of an ancient marketplace. The Mauryaans minted coins stamped with images that were as much about propaganda as they were about currency. Think of them as the original Instagram posts, showcasing the emperor's visage or symbols of prosperity. These coins weren't just for show. They were a practical innovation that facilitated trade across vast distances. A standardized currency meant merchants could do business with confidence, knowing the value of their goods wouldn't fluctuate wildly from one region to the next. And here's where we debunk a common myth, the romantic notion of seamless trade. Let's be honest, trade in the Mauryan era was anything but smooth. It was a tangled web of negotiations, bartering, and let's not forget the occasional skirmish. The Mauryans had to keep a tight grip on their territories, using a mix of diplomacy and military might to ensure their trade routes remained open. It was like playing a high-stakes game of chess, with each move carefully calculated to maintain dominance over a complex economic landscape. The economic strategies of the Mauryan Empire weren't just about enriching the state. They were about creating a foundation for stability. By promoting trade, they fostered economic growth, which in turn supported a burgeoning middle class. This wasn't just about lining the emperor's pockets. It was about ensuring the empire's longevity. A prosperous economy meant a content populace, and a content populace was less likely to revolt. It was an ancient lesson in economics that many modern nations would do well to remember. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the Mauryans as economic visionaries. The harsh reality was that their economic policies often came at a cost. The state's involvement in trade meant that they could impose taxes and tariffs that would make a modern tax collector weep with envy. These weren't just minor tolls. They were substantial levies that could make or break a merchant's livelihood. It was a delicate balance. Too high, and you risked alienating traders. Too low, and the state's coffers would suffer. Cordelia, with his Arthashastra, had laid the groundwork, but executing these policies required a deft touch and occasionally a heavy hand. Despite these challenges, the Mauryan trade network thrived, creating connections that spanned continents. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a cultural exchange that brought new ideas, technologies, and philosophies into the empire. It was a reminder that trade wasn't just about goods. It was about people and the interactions that shaped societies. The Mauryans understood this and used it to their advantage, crafting an empire that was as much about cultural influence as it was about economic power. In the end, the economic achievements of the Mauryan Empire were a testament to their ability to adapt and innovate. They weren't just passive participants in history. They were active architects, shaping the world around them with a blend of pragmatism and ambition. As we continue to explore their legacy, keep in mind that the Mauryans were more than just conquerors. They were visionaries who understood the power of trade and the potential of a connected world. And speaking of visionaries, next up, we'll delve into the scientific and technological innovations that flourished under the Mauryan Empire, where mathematics met mysticism and engineering was as much an art as a science. It's a tale of discovery and ingenuity, where the pursuit of knowledge was as relentless as the expansion of their trade networks. So stay tuned as we unravel the mysteries of Mauryan innovation, one calculation at a time. As we pivot from Mauryan innovations to their inevitable decline, let's not mince words. The empire's collapse wasn't exactly a graceful exit. Picture a grand stage production suddenly plagued by faulty props and actors forgetting their lines. The Mauryan Empire, sprawling and majestic in its heyday, found itself stumbling through a classic tale of overreach and internal discord by 185 BCE. But contrary to the notion of an empire that simply evaporated, it left behind a legacy as lasting as its stone-carved edicts. The curtain began to fall with the assassination of the last Mauryan ruler, Brihadratha, by his own commander-in-chief, Pushyamitra Shunga. Talk about a Shakespearean twist. This wasn't a mere palace coup. It was the final act of a drama where ambition and betrayal took center stage. Pushyamitra, like a seasoned political operator, seized power, marking the beginning of the Shunga dynasty. But before we cast him as the villain, let's put his actions into context. The empire he inherited was a shadow of its former self, stretched thin across territories and teetering on the brink of chaos. By the time Brihadratha met his untimely demise, the Mauryan administration had already started to unravel. Overextension was the empire's Achilles heel, and like any colossal structure, it buckled under its weight. Maintaining an empire over 5 million square kilometers isn't a walk in the park. It's more like a marathon through a minefield. The Mauryan administration, once a well-oiled machine, became a bureaucratic quagmire, with regional governors acting more like independent contractors than loyal stewards. Economic strain was palpable. The once flourishing trade routes that had fueled Mauryan prosperity were now breeding grounds for dissent. Regional leaders, sensing the central administration's vulnerability, began to play their own games of thrones, each eyeing a piece of the Mauryan pie. It was a classic case of every man for himself, as loyalty to the empire took a backseat to personal ambition. And with the central treasury dwindling like a forgotten New Year's resolution, empire's capacity to enforce its will across vast territories faltered. But let's not fall for the romanticized narrative of an empire that simply collapsed under its own grandeur. The decline was a tapestry woven with threads of external threats and internal strife. Invading forces from the northwest, including the Bactrian Greeks, saw an opportunity to press their advantage, adding to the empire's woes. The once mighty Mauryan military, famed for its might and strategic prowess, is now a relic of the past, struggling to defend its borders. As the empire fragmented, regional powers rose like phoenixes from the ashes. The Satavahanas in the Deccan and the Shungas in the north emerged as formidable players in the new geopolitical landscape. It was a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum, as they say. These regional dynasties weren't merely filling the void. They were reshaping the subcontinent's political map, each with their own vision for the future. Yet, despite the Mauryan Empire's disintegration, its legacy endured in unexpected ways. The administrative systems, economic policies, and cultural achievements established during its zenith laid the groundwork for future Indian civilizations. The concept of a centralized state, with its complex bureaucracy and standardized currency, was a blueprint that would be revisited time and again. The echoes of Mauryan governance resonated through subsequent empires, like a haunting refrain in the symphony of history. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth, the idea that the Mauryan Empire's decline was a complete disaster. Sure, it was messy, like a teenager's room on a Monday morning, but it was also a period of transformation. The cultural and intellectual exchanges that had flourished under Mauryan rule didn't just vanish. Buddhism, championed by Ashoka, continued to spread its influence across Asia, shaping the spiritual landscape of entire regions. The Mauryan era was a crucible of ideas, and its decline was not the end, but a transition into a new chapter. The lessons learned from its rise and fall are as relevant today as they were over 2 millennia ago. The Mauryan story is a cautionary tale about the perils of overextension, the importance of adaptable governance, and the enduring power of cultural diplomacy. It's a reminder that empires, like stars, burn brightest before they fade, leaving behind a legacy that transcends time. As we wrap up our journey through the Mauryan Empire, let's take a moment to reflect on its significance. From economic ingenuity to administrative brilliance, and from cultural achievements to philosophical transformations, the Mauryans crafted a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us. Their story is a testament to the complexity of human ambition and the delicate balance between power and responsibility. And while the empire may have crumbled, its lessons remain etched in the annals of history, a reminder that even the mightiest fall, but their stories endure. You're jostled awake not by the sound of an alarm, but by the cacophony of roosters, with pitch-perfect timing, and the insistent nudging of your fellow apprentice. Welcome to a medieval workshop, where your day starts before the sun can be bothered to show up. You're not just waking up early, you're waking up to a world that believes in a different kind of productivity, one that starts with the crack of dawn and doesn't end until the candle burns down to a stub. The first thing you notice is the cold. It's the kind of chill that seeps into your bones, making you wonder if you've somehow offended the gods of warmth. Drafty, that's putting it mildly. These stone walls do a stellar job of keeping the outside out, but they also serve as a medieval refrigerator. And forget about central heating, unless you count huddling around a piddly hearth as an efficient way to stay warm. Your morning routine involves layering up to resemble a fabric onion, all while trying to dodge the inevitable draft that seems to have a personal vendetta against you. Now, let's talk economics. You're an apprentice, which is basically medieval for get used to being broke. If you're lucky, you might get a daily wage of a penny or two, which in today's terms wouldn't even cover your caffeine fix. In medieval England, a skilled craftsman might earn about 2 to 3 pennies a day. Great, right? Except when you factor in that a loaf of bread could cost around 1.5 pennies. So your wage doesn't so much earn a living as it does keep you on the brink of starvation. And let's not forget, this isn't the age of credit cards or Venmo. You're dealing with hard coins when you have them. The economy is a delicate dance of favors, debts, and IOUs scribbled on whatever parchment you can scavenge. You might be crafting beautiful things during the day, but by nightfall, you're just hoping you can afford a decent meal and a pint of ale to wash away the day's grime. Speaking of grime, the workshop is a bustling hub of organized chaos. Forget about the romantic notion of a peaceful artisan studio. This is a loud, messy, and slightly hazardous environment where the tools are as rudimentary as they are numerous. Hammers, chisels, awls, they're all strewn about with a sense of order that only makes sense if you've been there long enough to decipher the madness. If OSHA existed back then, they'd have a field day. Safety goggles, gloves. The medieval craftsman trusts in skill and sheer grit to avoid losing a finger. And hygiene. Let's just say it's more of a conceptual art piece than a practice. You're lucky if you can get through the day without smelling like the inside of a tannery. The closest you get to cleanliness is wiping your hands on your tunic, which you're pretty sure started life as a different color. The morning is a blur of activity, with the air filled with the sounds of metal clanging, wood being planed, and the kind of gruff banter that only comes from people who've been stuck in close quarters for too long. There's an unspoken hierarchy here. You've got the master craftsman, journeyman, and then you, the lowly apprentice, fetching tools and absorbing knowledge by osmosis. But don't let the chaos fool you. This isn't just about making things. It's a microcosm of medieval society. The workshop is the heart of the local economy, providing everything from everyday tools to intricate pieces for the nobility. You're not just learning a trade, you're becoming part of a legacy, contributing to a system that's been churning out craftsmen for centuries. Of course, you're also learning the value of hard work. Every splinter, every callus is a badge of honor. And while the romanticized notion of the noble craftsman toiling away in solitude might appeal to the modern imagination, the reality is less poetic. It's back-breaking labor, and you're in it for the long haul. But hey, at least you're learning skills that'll make you indispensable, or so you hope. As the morning drags on, the workshop becomes a symphony of production. Each craftsman is a cog in this medieval machine, and the finished products are the culmination of skill, sweat, and sheer determination. The tools may be basic, but the results are anything but. It's a testament to human ingenuity that such primitive instruments can create works of art that are both functional and beautiful. And there you are, in the thick of it, soaking up knowledge and trying not to get in anyone's way. By the time the sun finally creeps over the horizon, you're already knee-deep in sawdust and shavings. You're learning that medieval life is less about the grandiose gestures and more about the small, everyday triumphs, like getting through the morning without losing a limb or your sanity. In this world, nothing comes easy, but there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you're part of something bigger, a tradition that's been handed down through generations. It's not about the money, because clearly there's not much of it. It's about the craft, the camaraderie, and the knowledge that while you're just one of many, your contributions matter. So, as you stand there, shivering slightly in the drafty chill, you realize the day has only just begun. You've got hours of toil ahead, but right now, in this moment, you're part of a legacy, and that's worth more than any penny. And just when you think you've got a hold on this medieval roller coaster, it's time to delve deeper into the gritty core of craftsmanship. Here's the thing. Being an apprentice in the Middle Ages wasn't just a job. It was a rite of passage that could make or break you. Picture this. A decade or more of your life dedicated to learning a craft with the privilege of paying for the honor. Yes, that's right. You shelled out whatever meager savings or family wealth you had just to be overworked and underfed. Talk about an investment. Apprenticeship contracts back then were less about mutual benefit and more akin to signing away your freedom. You're bound to your master like a medieval sidekick, Batman and Robin, if Robin had to sweep floors and fetch water. And if you thought modern internships were rough, try surviving on a diet that barely qualifies as sustenance. Bread, beans, and maybe a sliver of cheese if you're lucky. It's a wonder anyone survived long enough to actually become a master craftsman. Let's not forget the tools of the trade, or in many cases, the lack thereof. Your average medieval workshop was a far cry from today's high-tech facilities. Instead, you've got basic, often handmade tools that look like they belong in a museum exhibit on the evolution of blisters. Take the hammer, for instance. It's less a precision instrument and more a blunt object designed for maximum impact. And I'm not just talking about the nails. Chisels, saws, and alls round out the ensemble, each with a personality as abrasive as the tasks they perform. If it sounds like a medieval toolset was a recipe for disaster, you wouldn't be far off. Yet somehow, these rudimentary instruments produced everything from towering cathedrals to delicate jewelry. It's a testament to human tenacity, or maybe just the stubborn refusal to acknowledge limitations. And it wasn't just about the tools themselves. It was the skill and sheer muscle memory honed over years of practice. Imagine swinging a mallet for hours on end, perfecting the art of not smashing your thumb, unless you're into that kind of pain. The chaos of the workshop was a sensory overload. The air was thick with the aromas of sweat, sawdust, and sometimes the sharp tang of metal shavings. The noise was relentless, metal clanging on metal, the steady rhythm of a saw, and the occasional shout as someone inevitably lost their grip on a tool. You quickly learn to tune it out, or at least pretend you do, while mentally composing your medieval equivalent of a resignation letter. But here's a reality check. Despite the grime and the grind, this was where real magic happened. Each craftsman was a magician in their own right, turning raw materials into functional art. It wasn't glamorous, but it was vital. These workshops were the beating heart of medieval commerce, churning out goods that kept society moving. Whether you were fashioning horseshoes, barrels, or intricate stained glass, you were contributing to the grand tapestry of medieval life. Economically speaking, you were also part of a complex web of supply and demand. Noble commissions could make or break a workshop, with the wealthier patrons often dictating the trends. If Lord So-and-so wanted an ornate chest to store his collection of dubious relics, you'd better believe the whole shop would pivot to make it happen. And while you're at it, you might as well throw in some added flair, perhaps a touch of gold leaf, assuming you can find any that hasn't been pilfered. The political and social factors at play were just as important. Guilds governed the world of medieval craftsmanship, acting as both protectors and gatekeepers. They set the standards, determined who could practice, and sometimes even decided who got to eat. It was a system of checks and balances, ensuring quality, but also keeping the power firmly in the hands of a select few. You couldn't simply claim to be a master craftsman. You had to earn it through years of toil and the approval of your peers. It's like trying to get a blue checkmark on medieval Instagram, but with more splinters. As you navigate this world, you start to appreciate the myths that have sprung up around it. The romanticized vision of the noble craftsman toiling away in solitude creates an appealing narrative, but the reality was far less glamorous, driven by necessity rather than choice. You worked because you had to, because there was no safety net, no fallback plan. And while the camaraderie among craftsmen was real, so was the competition. Everyone's vying for the same scraps of recognition and prosperity, hoping to one day hang their own shingle and start the cycle anew. And so, you labor on, each day a testament to your endurance. You might not be rich, but you're rich in calluses, and that's something, right? You're learning the craft, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, and maybe, just maybe, making a name for yourself in this bustling world of medieval enterprise. The day isn't over yet, and neither is your journey. As the sun climbs higher and the workshop heats up, you're reminded that this is just the beginning. You've got a long road ahead, filled with challenges and triumphs, mistakes and lessons. But for now, you're here, part of a legacy that stretches back through the ages, and that's something to be proud of. So roll up your sleeves, grab that hammer, and get back to work. The medieval world waits for no one, especially not an apprentice with dreams of mastery. As the sun climbs higher and the workshop heats up, you can practically feel the sweat working overtime to escape your pores. It's the medieval version of a sauna, only without the promise of relaxation or cucumber water. You've been swinging that hammer with the enthusiasm of someone who just realized that every strike is a step closer to midday, a time that promises a break of sorts. But don't get too excited. Your upcoming meal is less a feast and more a stoic exercise in sustenance. Welcome to lunch, medieval style, where the bread is as hard as the life you're living, and your side dish is a generous serving of partridge. Think of partridge as a soup stew hybrid that's been simmered until any trace of vibrancy has fled the pot. This delightful concoction might include peas, beans, oats, and whatever vegetables haven't been claimed by decay. It's not exactly a Michelin-starred affair, but it keeps you from keeling over. If you're lucky, someone's thrown in a bit of salted meat, though that's about as rare as a unicorn sighting. The hierarchy here is as rigid as the crust on that loaf of bread. The master craftsman gets the best pickings, while you, the lowly apprentice, are left with whatever scraps he deems fit to toss your way. You might be tempted to romanticize this as a quaint communal meal, but the reality is it's a battlefield for survival, with everyone jostling for their share. You quickly learn that politeness is as useful as a blunt chisel. As you eat, you're surrounded by the unmistakable sounds of grumbling stomachs and the occasional ribbing from your fellow craftsmen. Social dynamics in the workshop are driven by a blend of camaraderie and cutthroat competition. It's a tightrope walk between forming alliances and defending your territory. The master is the undisputed king of this castle, with journeymen acting as his trusted knights. You, on the other hand, are more like the squire, hoping to one day be dubbed into the ranks of the skilled. Now, let's talk about the myth of the masterpiece. You might be picturing some grand work of art, but in medieval terms, it's more of a final exam that determines whether you graduate from apprentice to journeyman. It's not about creating the next Sistine Chapel. It's about demonstrating competence and mastery over the basics. And if you think the pressure's on, you're right. One slip-up, and you're back to the drawing board, or worse, fetching more partridge. Creating a masterpiece wasn't just an artistic endeavor, it was a ticket to independence. Get it right, and you could start your own workshop, hang your sign, and maybe even earn enough to afford an extra slice of bread. The stakes were high, and the outcome could determine your entire career trajectory. No pressure, right. But here's the kicker. The term masterpiece today evokes visions of solitary genius, the lone artist chipping away at marble in a moment of divine inspiration. The reality was far more collaborative, with apprentices and journeymen often pitching in. It was less about individual accolades and more about proving you could work within the system, adhering to the guild standards and demonstrating your ability to contribute to the collective output. And as you sit there, gnawing on your bread, you begin to understand the appeal of these myths. They offer a narrative of triumph over adversity, of the lone craftsman achieving greatness through sheer talent and willpower. But the reality is a complex web of social dynamics, economic pressures, and the relentless grind of everyday life. It's not about the singular genius, but the collective effort, the communal struggle to create something that stands the test of time. As you ponder this, the bell tolls, signaling the end of your brief respite. It's back to work, where the tools are as unforgiving as the hierarchy. Your hands are blistered, your muscles scream in silent protest, but there's a strange satisfaction in knowing you're part of a tradition that's been shaping the world for centuries. You're not just crafting objects, you're crafting history, piece by piece, hammer stroke by hammer stroke. And so you rise, brushing crumbs from your tunic, ready to face the afternoon with renewed determination. The medieval workshop doesn't care about your comfort, it cares about your contribution. In this world, your worth is measured not by your words, but by your calluses. The sun may be relentless, but so are you. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and you're determined not to end up as partridge. As you rise from your humble midday feast, wiping crumbs from your tunic like a knight brushing off dragon scales. It's time to dive into the underbelly of medieval craftsmanship, the guild system. If you thought the workshop's hierarchy was something, wait until you meet the guilds, the original gatekeepers of medieval commerce, with influence that would make modern trade unions look like a neighborhood bake sale committee. Guilds were the medieval version of both a country club and the mob, if you can wrap your head around that. On one hand, they were about camaraderie and shared knowledge. On the other, they had a monopoly on what got made and who got to make it. They controlled everything from the price of a horseshoe to the quality of a tapestry, wielding power like a blacksmith, brandishing a particularly hefty hammer. Little did you know that your craft came with a side of medieval red tape. These organizations were more than just professional networks. They were the political and economic lifeblood of any self-respecting medieval town. Membership was mandatory if you wanted to practice a trade, and it wasn't just about paying your dues. Oh no, it was a whole initiation process. You needed to be vouched for, like getting a recommendation letter from someone who knows the Pope personally. Once in, you had the privilege of contributing to a collective that decided what constituted quality, and more importantly, who got to profit from it. Let's bust a myth right here. Guilds weren't the romantic guardians of tradition that some history books might have you believe. Sure, they preserved knowledge, but they also preserved their own interests with a tenacity that would make a pit bull proud. They were less about cultural heritage and more about economic control. They'd blacklist anyone who dared to work outside their sanctioned prices or dared to innovate without permission. Want to try a new technique? Better run it by the guild, or you might find yourself scraping pottage parts for a living. And speaking of control, guilds had their fingers in every pie, or rather, every loaf of bread. They set the prices on goods, and woe betide any merchant who tried to undercut them. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was enforced with a zeal that would make a medieval inquisitor look laid back. Break the rules, and you'd face anything from fines to expulsion, which was the medieval equivalent of being ghosted by everyone in town. But why the iron grip? Well, it turns out that when you control the supply and demand, you control the town's economy. Guilds could dictate the ebb and flow of goods, ensuring that their members lived comfortably while outsiders struggled to make a single penny. They were the medieval hedge fund managers, manipulating markets for their own benefit. And just like today, it's all about who you know. Connections could open doors that skills alone could not, and the guild was your golden ticket to the medieval middle class. Yet, there's a romantic allure in the idea of guilds as bastions of skill and tradition, and that's not entirely unfounded. They did maintain high standards. After all, a shoddy product would tarnish the guild's reputation faster than you can say, woodworm-infested chair. They were about craftsmanship and quality assurance, but with a healthy dose of self-interest. The master craftsman was a revered figure, and achieving that status was akin to being knighted. It meant you'd reached a level of skill and respect that put you in control of your destiny, or at least your workbench. And let's not forget the social scene. Guilds weren't just about work, they were about community. Regular meetings, feast days, and even charitable acts knitted members together. You'd think of them as a medieval LinkedIn, but with more beer and fewer motivational posts. Here, you'd find lifelong connections, alliances formed over shared tasks, and the mutual understanding that in this world, you either band together or perish alone. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the workshop floor, the reality of guild life sets in. It's a dance of power, prestige, and politics, with each craftsman maneuvering for his place in the pecking order. And while the guild might seem like a medieval utopia to some, for others, it's a reminder that power often comes at a cost. Behind the camaraderie lies a ruthless hierarchy, where innovation is stifled by tradition, and personal gain often trumps communal benefit. And so, as you return to your bench, tools in hand, you realize that the guild system is both your safety net and your shackle. It's a world where success is measured not just by what you create, but by the alliances you forge and the rules you navigate. In a medieval workshop, your hands may be calloused, but your mind must be sharper still. After all, in this guild-governed realm, it's not just about making a living, it's about surviving the gauntlet of tradition, politics, and enterprise. And if you can manage that, well, you might just find your place in the annals of craftsmanship history, warts and all. As the shadows grow longer, you find yourself reflecting on the broader tapestry of medieval life, where the workshop was just one thread in a complex weave of society. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the plague rat in the workshop. Yes, we're diving headfirst into the Black Death, that infamous 14th century pandemic that makes modern epidemics look like a mild inconvenience. Picture this: a world where the population could drop by as much as 60% in some areas, wiping out entire towns and leaving those left behind to pick up the pieces. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death rampaged across Europe, and believe me, it wasn't handing out participation trophies. It was an equal opportunity destroyer, sparing neither age, rank, nor occupation. The medieval workshop was no sanctuary. In fact, the close quarters probably made it a veritable petri dish of pestilence. But let's focus on the silver lining of this decidedly dark cloud, the labor market. Suddenly, with a scarcity of workers, those who survived found themselves in high demand. Wages rose as the labor supply dwindled, giving craftsmen a rare opportunity to demand better pay. A medieval worker's dream come true. You could say that the Black Death was the original labor rights movement, albeit one you wouldn't want to join voluntarily. This shift didn't just change the financial landscape, it rattled the very foundations of societal structure. Feudalism took a hit as serfs realized their newfound bargaining power. It was like a medieval version of musical chairs, and when the music stopped, those still standing had a real chance to renegotiate their positions. It was a time of upheaval, and the rigid hierarchies that had governed European life began to show cracks. Yet, for all its transformative impact, the Black Death is often shrouded in myth. The vision of a world brought to its knees by the plague is compelling, but it fails to capture the resilience of the people who lived through it. Life didn't halt in its tracks, it adapted. Workshops continued to produce, albeit with smaller crews and greater urgency, forging forward in a world forever altered by the shadow of death. Now, let's dispel another romantic notion: the noble medieval craftsman toiling away in isolation, creating masterpieces that defy time. This is the stuff of Renaissance fair dreams, but the reality was far more gritty. Craftsmanship wasn't a solitary endeavor, it was a team sport. While the master might design the blueprint, it was the apprentices and journeymen who did much of the heavy lifting. Literally, picture your favorite artist's studio, then replace the gentle hum of creativity with the clanging chaos of a medieval workshop. It's less visionary genius and more sweat-stained teamwork. And that supposed independence, it was a double-edged sword. Sure, you could climb the ranks and eventually open your own shop, but only if you survived the grueling years it took to get there. And even then, you were bound by the constraints of the guild, the ever-watchful eye ensuring you didn't stray from tradition. Innovation was a risky business, often stifled by the very system that claimed to promote quality and progress. As you stand there, contemplating the day's end, you can't help but appreciate the comforts of modern life. Central heating, weekends, and the luxury of washing machines are miracles compared to the medieval slog. You're not just grateful for your ergonomic chair, you're downright enamored with it. The world you live in is a far cry from the drafty, dirt-floor reality of a medieval workshop. And that's okay, because it's crucial to acknowledge the strides humanity has made. Reflecting on your exhausting day, a sense of relief washes over you. Imagine stumbling through life without antibiotics, labor unions, or even the humble band-aid. Every splinter could be a death sentence, every cough a harbinger of doom. You wouldn't just be battling the elements and the economy. You'd be at war with the very environment you inhabited. In a world where survival was the name of the game, the medieval craftsman was both hero and victim, navigating a landscape both beautiful and brutal. As you hang up your metaphorical apron and prepare to rejoin the 21st century, consider this. The legacy of craftsmanship is one of resilience and innovation, despite its many hardships. These artisans laid the groundwork for modern industry, crafting the very tools and techniques that would one day spawn the technological wonders we take for granted. While the romantic vision of the noble craftsman persists, it's important to remember the grit behind the glamour. And so, as you close the door on this historical journey, spare a thought for those who came before. They didn't have the luxury of hindsight, but they did have the undeniable human spirit that pushes us to create, to build, and to endure. In the grand tapestry of history, the medieval workshop is a vibrant thread, woven with sweat, ingenuity, and the indomitable will to survive. In the end, you wouldn't last a day in a medieval workshop, and that's perfectly fine. You're not meant to. Instead, take the lessons of the past, wrapped in their layers of myth and reality, and use them to appreciate the present. After all, history isn't just about what happened. It's about what we learn from it. Now, kick back, relax, and maybe order some takeout. You've earned it. In the misty realms of ancient Japan, long before samurais and sushi rolls, there existed a culture so groundbreaking that it practically invented the concept of old school. Meet the Jarman people, the original pottery wizards whose handiwork predates even the pyramids of Egypt. We're talking about a time when woolly mammoths roamed the earth, around 14,000 BCE. That's over 16,000 years ago. Give or take a millennium. Because who's counting when you're making history? The Jarman weren't just about surviving. They were thriving, crafting, and shaping a society that would leave its mark on the archaeological world. So, what's the deal with these folks and their obsession with pottery? Well, it's not just any pottery. We're talking about the world's oldest known pottery pieces. While other cultures were still figuring out that fire was hot, the Jarman were busy perfecting the art of clay. Their signature rope pattern designs weren't just functional. They were the ancient equivalent of haute couture. This wasn't just about holding your fish stew. It was about doing it in style. Each piece tells the story of a people who had time to burn and clay to sculpt, which is quite the luxury when you're living in an era where saber-toothed cats are part of the local wildlife. But how do we know all this fascinating stuff about a culture that didn't leave behind written records or even Instagram stories? Archaeology, my friends. It's the closest thing we have to time travel, and it's given us a front-row seat to the Jarman lifestyle. Through excavations, particularly on the Japanese islands, researchers have uncovered a treasure trove of artifacts that paint a vivid picture of life back then. From pottery shards to pit dwellings, the evidence suggests that the Jarman people were not just hunter-gatherers, but also had a flair for design and innovation. Let's talk numbers for a second. The Jarman period stretches from approximately 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE. That's a whopping 13,700 years of continuous cultural development. To put that into perspective, the Roman Empire, with all its grandeur, lasted about 500 years. The Jarman timeline is like the ultimate marathon runner in the historical relay race. Their society evolved over thousands of years, adapting to changes in climate and geography, and leaving behind clues that modern archaeologists are still piecing together. The term Jarman itself is derived from the distinctive rope-patterned Jarman decorations found on their pottery. This wasn't just an artistic choice. It was a form of storytelling, a way to pass down traditions and mark significant events. Think of these parts as the ancient version of a family photo album, only much heavier and less likely to shadow when dropped. Each part is unique, showcasing the creativity and skill of its maker, and serving as a testament to the ingenuity of a people who lived long before the concept of a weekend pottery class. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the Jarman pottery is undeniably impressive, life in this period wasn't all about crafting and lounging by a cozy hearth. The Jarman people had to contend with the harsh realities of their environment. They were primarily hunter-gatherers, which meant their diet was as diverse as the Japanese landscape. They hunted, fished, and foraged, relying on the bounty of the land and sea to sustain their communities. It's a lifestyle that modern-day foodies might envy: fresh fish, wild game, and seasonal fruits, but it also required a deep knowledge of the natural world and a constant readiness to adapt. Speaking of adaptation, the Jarman culture is a prime example of resilience in the face of change. Over their extensive timeline, they experienced significant shifts in climate, from the tail end of the Ice Age to warmer periods. These changes forced them to innovate, leading to advancements in tool-making, housing, and agriculture. Their pit dwellings, for instance, were designed to withstand the elements, providing shelter and warmth in the colder months. These homes were semi-subterranean, making them efficient in terms of insulation, a primitive yet effective form of eco-friendly architecture. It's easy to fall into the trap of viewing ancient cultures through rose-tinted glasses, imagining a simpler time when life was purer and untainted by modern complexities. But the reality is far more nuanced. The Jarman culture, for all its achievements, was not without its challenges. They faced the constant threat of natural disasters, from earthquakes to tsunamis, which are as much a part of Japan's history as its cultural achievements. Despite these obstacles, the Jarman people managed to carve out a niche for themselves, creating a society that was as rich in art as it was in survival skills. Now, let's bust some myths that often surround ancient cultures like the Jarman. There's a tendency to view prehistoric societies as primitive, living in a perpetual state of struggle. However, the archaeological evidence tells a different story. The Jarman were not merely surviving, they were thriving. Their pottery is not just a testament to their artistic capabilities, but also their complex social structures and rituals. These were people who gathered in communities, shared resources, and developed traditions that would influence generations to come. The Jarman culture's legacy is still felt in modern Japan. Their pottery techniques laid the groundwork for future innovations in ceramics, influencing styles and methods that have been passed down through the ages. When you think about it, the Jarman period is like the opening act of a concert that spans millennia, setting the stage for the rich tapestry of Japanese history that would follow. They were the original trendsetters, proving that even in prehistoric times, fashion was about making a statement. In essence, the Jarman people remind us that human creativity and adaptability are timeless qualities. Whether it's crafting a beautifully decorated part or finding innovative ways to live in harmony with nature, their story is one of resourcefulness and resilience. So next time you sip a hot beverage from your favorite ceramic mug, take a moment to appreciate the ancient artisans who, thousands of years ago, were shaping clay and culture with equal flair. The Jarman culture may be long gone, but their influence is etched in the annals of history, and in the very earth from which their pottery was born. The Jarman culture may be long gone, but their influence is etched in the annals of history, and in the very earth from which their pottery was born. So, how did they pull off this miracle of thriving without the conveniences of modern life? Spoiler alert, it wasn't through the magic of Amazon Prime or the convenience of drive-through sushi. Instead, the Jarman mastered the delicate art of living off the land, blending resourcefulness with a dash of culinary creativity. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Jarman's daily grind, the essentials of their survival kit, if you will. Picture this, a society that knew how to forage like pros, turning the Japanese archipelago into their personal buffet. We're talking about a hunter-gatherer lifestyle that would make today's survivalists look like amateurs. With no supermarkets or fast food joints in sight, the Jarman had to rely on their keen understanding of the local flora and fauna. Their diet was a veritable smorgasbord of nature's offerings. From acorns to chestnuts, the forests were their pantry, and they knew how to work it. These nuts weren't just snacks. They were ground into flour for bread, filling bellies and fueling the community. It's a wonder they didn't invent granola bars while they were at it. And let's not forget their fishing prowess. With Japan being an island nation, the Jarman were naturally drawn to the sea. They cast their nets wide, literally, pulling in fish, shellfish, and even sea mammals. Their seafood spread was as rich as you'd find at any modern-day sushi restaurant, minus the wasabi. But wait, there's more to this oceanic tale. The Jarman were the original recyclers, creating shell mounds that served as ancient waste management systems. These shell middens, as archaeologists call them, are like time capsules, preserving remnants of meals that date back thousands of years. They didn't just toss their trash willy-nilly, they piled it up with a purpose. These mounds offer a peek into their world, showing us what was on the Jarman menu, and giving us clues about their environment and economy. Talk about leaving an eco-friendly footprint. In truth, this shell mound strategy wasn't just about tidying up, it was about sustainability. By examining the contents of these mounds, researchers have discovered a surprising level of ecological balance. The Jarman knew not to overfish or exploit their resources, ensuring a steady supply of food for the future. They were practicing environmental conservation long before it was a hashtag. It's a lesson in living in harmony with nature that many modern societies are still grappling with today. Myth-busting time. There's a persistent notion that the Jarman were nomads, wandering aimlessly across the landscape with nothing better to do than invent pottery. But that's a gross oversimplification. Sure, they moved around in search of food, but they also established semi-permanent settlements. Their pit dwellings, dug into the earth, offered stability and shelter from the elements. These homes were a testament to their ingenuity, providing warmth in winter and coolness in summer. The Jarmen weren't just aimless wanderers. They were savvy settlers who knew how to make the most of their environment. Economically speaking, the Jarmen society was all about sharing and cooperation. This wasn't a world of cutthroat competition or hoarding wealth. Resources were communal, and survival depended on working together. It's a far cry from the dog-eat-dog mentality that can dominate modern economies. In Jarmen society, the emphasis was on collective well-being rather than individual gain. It's a model that's both appealing and elusive, especially in today's world of rampant consumerism. Let's address another misconception: the idea that ancient societies were primitive and unsophisticated. The truth is, the Jarmen were anything but. Their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of changing climates and landscapes is a testament to their resilience. Over the millennia, they developed an impressive toolkit, crafting everything from fishing gear to hunting weapons. Their tools weren't just utilitarian. They were crafted with care and precision, reflecting a deep understanding of materials and techniques. And let's not overlook the social and spiritual dimensions of Jarmen life. While we may never know the full extent of their beliefs and rituals, the artifacts they left behind offer tantalizing hints. Figurines, for instance, suggest a rich tapestry of mythology and spirituality. These clay creations were more than just decorative. They held cultural significance, perhaps representing deities or ancestors. The Jarmen's connection to the spiritual world adds another layer to their story, reminding us that they were as much about culture and community as they were about survival. It's hard not to romanticize the Jarmen way of life. In many ways, they were the ultimate back-to-basics society, thriving without the bells and whistles of modern technology. Yet, it's essential to acknowledge the challenges they faced. Life was unpredictable, with natural disasters lurking on the horizon and resources that could dwindle without warning. The Jarmen had to be constantly vigilant and adaptable, ready to face whatever nature threw their way. In the end, the Jarmen culture is a study in contrasts. They were both ancient and innovative, simple yet sophisticated. Their story is one of adaptation, creativity, and resilience, offering lessons that are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. As we continue to unearth their legacy, we're reminded of the enduring human spirit, the ability to thrive even in the most challenging of circumstances. The Jarmen may not have had the conveniences of the modern world, but they had something perhaps even more valuable: a deep connection to the land and each other, a community that was as resilient as it was resourceful. Stay tuned, because the Jarmen story isn't over yet. There's still more to uncover about their cultural achievements, social structures, and the legacy they've left behind. We may not have all the answers, but one thing is certain: the Jarmen people have left an indelible mark on history, one that continues to captivate and inspire. Let's dive headfirst into the social fabric of the Jarmen people, where survival wasn't just about dodging woolly mammoths, but creating a community that thrived on cooperation. You see, while we were busy inventing the wheel, the Jarmen were mastering the art of communal living, turning the Japanese archipelago into a patchwork of villages that had more in common with modern co-ops than medieval fiefdoms. Now, forget the towering castles of Game of Thrones. The Jarmen were all about going underground, literally. Their homes, known as pit dwellings, were the prehistoric equivalent of eco-friendly bungalows. These structures, dug partially into the earth, provided a natural form of insulation, keeping things cool in the summer and cozy in the winter. They might not have had thermostats, but the Jarmen knew a thing or two about sustainable living. Imagine a neighborhood where everyone had their own hobbit hole, minus the second breakfast. These pit dwellings weren't just practical, they were a cornerstone of Jarmen society. Typically, they measured around 10 square meters, which might sound cramped until you realize they were designed for communal living. Families lived together, sharing space and resources, which brings us to the Jarmen's flair for cooperation. This wasn't just about pooling snacks for a potluck. These folks had a system that would make any socialist proud. Resources like food and tools were shared, ensuring no one went without. It's like a prehistoric version of socialism, but with more acorns and fewer manifestos. Speaking of sharing, let's talk about their early version of what we might cheekily call health insurance. While they didn't have Blue Cross Blue Shield, they had something arguably more valuable, a strong community safety net. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Jarmen took care of their sick and elderly. Skeletal remains show signs of healed injuries and diseases that required long-term care, indicating a society that didn't just toss its weakest members to the saber-toothed tigers. They embraced a kind of proto-welfare state where the community ensured the well-being of all its members. It's a lesson in humanity that some modern systems could stand to learn from. Now, let's bust a myth wider than a Jarmen pit dwelling. There's a romantic notion that ancient societies were stuck in a brutal, every-person-for-themselves mindset. But the Jarmen's approach to communal living and resource sharing tells a different story. They were less about the rat race and more about the ratatouille, sharing their harvest, their homes, and their lives. It wasn't utopia, but it was a society that valued collaboration over competition. But it wasn't all cumber and shared acorns. The Jarmen people, like any society, had their hierarchies and power dynamics. Some evidence suggests certain individuals had higher status, likely due to age, wisdom, or even their pottery skills. After all, when your culture revolves around clay pots, being the Michelangelo of mud could earn you some serious street cred, or should I say, forest path cred. These power dynamics didn't lead to oppressive regimes, but rather a society that balanced respect for authority with communal cooperation. Economically, the Jarmen system was as much about the barter of goods as it was about the exchange of knowledge. Skills like fishing, hunting, and crafting were shared among communities, ensuring everyone had access to the resources they needed to survive. Think of it as a prehistoric LinkedIn, where connections were made face-to-face, not through a digital interface. Their economy wasn't driven by a relentless pursuit of wealth, but by a fundamental understanding that survival depended on collaboration. Let's add another layer to this social tapestry with the role of spirituality in Jarmen society. While they weren't building monumental cathedrals, the Jarmen did have a rich spiritual life, as evidenced by their clay figurines and stone circles. These artifacts suggest a belief system that connected them to the natural world, with rituals that likely celebrated the cycles of life and nature. It wasn't organized religion as we know it, but a spirituality that wove together the fabric of their daily lives, much like their beloved pottery. As we peel back the layers of Jarmen society, it's clear that their story is one of resilience and ingenuity. They crafted a world where sharing wasn't just a nice idea, but a survival strategy. It's a narrative that challenges the notion that ancient societies were primitive and offers a blueprint for cooperation that still resonates today. The Jarmen remind us that community isn't just about proximity. It's about support, shared goals, and the collective will to thrive. And so, the Jarmen story continues to unfold, captivating us with their creativity and complexity. There's still more to explore about their cultural achievements and the legacy they've left behind. So stay tuned, because we're just getting started on this journey through the annals of history, where the Jarmen people continue to inspire with their timeless tale of survival and community. As we unravel more of the Jarmen culture, let's pivot from their communal living to what really set their clay apart, the Dagu figurines. Imagine, if you will, a world without Legos, Funko Pops, or action figures. What did you have? The Dagu figurines, of course. These small, humanoid sculptures are like the ancient world's answer to figurine fandom, except they weren't just collecting dust on a shelf. Now, these Dagu aren't just about aesthetics. They're a window into the Jarmen soul, found predominantly in the later phases of the Jarmen period. We're talking roughly 14,000 to 300 BCE. These clay figures ranged in size from a few inches to over a foot tall, and each one was unique, sporting features that ranged from the abstract to the bizarre. Think of them as the prehistoric Picasso's delight, or the original avant-garde art collection, if you will. Some had exaggerated eyes, others had intricate patterns etched into their bodies, and a few looked like they stepped out of a sci-fi convention. Seriously, with names like Shakoki Dagu or Gargle-eyed Dagu, it's hard not to imagine these as the prototypes for an ancient anime series. So, what's the deal with these clay creations? Were they just the Jarmen's version of garden gnomes, or did they serve a higher purpose? Well, Scholars have debated their function for years, and the theories are as varied as the Dagu themselves. Some suggest they were used in fertility rituals, given their often voluptuous shapes. Others argue they might have been involved in healing ceremonies, or perhaps they were mere status symbols, a prehistoric flex, if you will. The most compelling theory ties them to spirituality and a deep connection with nature. The Jarman people didn't have a written language or Instagram influencers to guide their spiritual journeys, so the Dagu acted as a physical manifestation of their beliefs. They may have represented deities or spirits that govern the natural world, a kind of clay conduit to the divine. It's like having a heartline to the gods, but with a more tactile, earthy vibe. To put this in perspective, consider their burial practices. The Jarman had an intriguing approach to dealing with the dead that sheds light on their beliefs. Bodies were often interred in a fetal position, which some interpret as a symbolic return to the womb of Mother Earth. Occasionally, these Dagu figurines were found buried alongside the deceased, suggesting a role in rituals for the afterlife or as protectors in the great beyond. It's as if the Jarman were saying, take this clay companion with you, just in case you need a friend on your journey. A bit like packing a security blanket for the ultimate trip. Now, let's not pretend the Jarman were all about serene spirituality and clay companions. Life was harsh, and their art reflected the realities they faced. The Dagu, with their varied and sometimes unsettling appearances, could signify the struggles of life in an unpredictable world. Perhaps they were a way to make sense of the chaos around them, a tangible representation of their hopes, fears, and dreams. Let's not forget the economic angle here. Crafting these figures wasn't just a pastime. It was labor-intensive and required skill. The clay had to be carefully shaped, fired, and decorated. This artistry suggests a society with enough resources and stability to support specialized craftspeople. You don't spend hours perfecting a Dagu if you're worried about your next meal. This indicates a certain level of prosperity and social organization, where some individuals could dedicate themselves to the arts. But what about the myth-busting side of things? It's tempting to romanticize the Jarman as mystical artisans crafting spiritual icons. Yet the reality is likely more nuanced. Sure, some Dagu were probably revered, but others might have been little more than toys or teaching tools. After all, in a world without screens, a clay figure could be as captivating as any iPad. So, while we paint the Jarman as spiritual savants, let's not forget they were human too, complex, creative, and sometimes just looking for a way to pass the time. In the grand scheme of things, the Dagu figurines are a testament to the Jarman's ingenuity and their intricate relationship with the world around them. They remind us that even in the prehistoric age, people sought to express their beliefs and emotions through art. The Jarman culture might be ancient, but their legacy is a reminder that the quest for meaning and beauty is as old as humanity itself. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of the Jarman period, let's appreciate these clay creations for what they truly are. Echoes of a society that saw the world not just as a place to survive, but as one to be celebrated and understood. And who knows, maybe somewhere in the vast timeline of history, a Jarman artisan is smiling, knowing their work has sparked curiosity thousands of years later. Stay tuned, because the Jarman story isn't finished yet. There's more to uncover about their artistic endeavors and spiritual insights as we delve deeper into the legacy of this remarkable culture. As we rummage through the remnants of the Jarman culture, piecing together their lives like a historical jigsaw puzzle, it's time to zoom out and see how these ancient artisans fit into the broader canvas of world history. Picture this. While the Jarman were perfecting their pottery and sculpting their Dagu figurines, the rest of the world was busy with its own brand of chaos and creativity. Around 14000 BCE, when the Jarman were just getting started, other cultures were sowing the seeds of civilization, literally and figuratively. Let's take a quick world tour, shall we? In the Fertile Crescent, the Neolithic Revolution was in full swing by 10000 BCE, with folks trading in their hunter-gatherer lifestyles for a more sedentary, agriculture-driven existence. Meanwhile, the Mesopotamians were scribbling away in cuneiform, and the Egyptians were laying the groundwork for what would become a pyramid scheme of monumental proportions. Across the globe, societies were evolving, yet the Jarman were doing their own thing, blissfully unaware of the agricultural arms race happening elsewhere. You might say the Jarmen were the rebels of the prehistoric world, sticking to their hunting, gathering, and fishing guns, while others planted the seeds of urban complexity. But let's not romanticize it too much. Their choice was as much about environmental necessity as cultural preference. The lush forests and abundant coastlines of Japan provided a veritable buffet of resources, making agriculture less appealing. And let's face it, who wants to spend all day weeding when you can be out there perfecting your fishing technique? To put it in perspective, while the Jarmen were busy catching fish and crafting some of the world's oldest pottery, the Chinese were developing sophisticated bronze working techniques by 2000 BCE. Over in the Americas, the Olmecs were carving colossal stone heads around 1200 BCE, leaving a mark as indelible as the Jarmen's clay parts. Yet, despite the geographical and cultural differences, there's a shared thread of human ingenuity running through these narratives. Now, about that noble savage trope we love to throw around. The idea that the Jarmen and their contemporaries lived in a perpetual state of harmony with nature is as appealing as it is misleading. Yes, they had a deep connection to the land, but it wasn't all Zen gardens and tranquil tea ceremonies. The Jarmen had to navigate a world fraught with challenges, from fluctuating sea levels to unpredictable weather patterns. Their resilience was born not of idyllic pastoralism, but of sheer necessity. They weren't communing with nature. They were battling it, adapting to its whims with every passing season. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Jarmen's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale of survival. Their commitment to community and craftsmanship offers a lesson in sustainability and cooperation that resonates today. The Jarmen period stretched from around 14000 BCE to 300 BCE, a staggering 700 years of cultural continuity. In contrast, our own modern industrial era has barely scraped the surface of 2 centuries, yet we're already grappling with the environmental consequences of rapid technological advancement. The Jarmen remind us that progress doesn't always mean bigger, faster, or more complex. Sometimes, it's about making the most of what you have and doing so with a flair that would make any contemporary designer jealous. Their pottery techniques, with their intricate rope-patterned designs, laid the groundwork for Japan's rich ceramic tradition. Even today, Japanese pottery is celebrated for its craftsmanship, a testament to the Jarmen's enduring influence. Economically speaking, the Jarmen's communal resource management stands in stark contrast to the cutthroat capitalism of our age. They operated on a system of shared resources and collective well-being, where the community's survival was paramount. It's a model that challenges the modern narrative of individualism, reminding us that sometimes cooperation trumps competition. And then there's the social fabric of Jarmen society, a tapestry woven with threads of kinship, spirituality, and artistry. Their pit dwellings, with their eco-friendly design, were more than just shelters. They were communal hubs where families gathered, shared stories, and supported each other through the trials of prehistoric life. It's a poignant reminder that the essence of community transcends time, connecting us to our ancestors in ways that are both profound and deeply human. So, as you sit at your next dinner party, armed with Jarmen trivia to either fascinate or bore your friends, remember this. The Jarmen people were a testament to the enduring human spirit, a culture that thrived against the odds and left a legacy as rich as the soil from which they crafted their pottery. They may not have built towering monuments or conquered distant lands, but their story is one of resilience, creativity, and a profound connection to the world around them. The Jarmen's tale is a reminder that history isn't just about the grandiose. It's about the everyday lives of people who, like us, sought to make sense of their world. It's a narrative of survival, innovation, and the timeless quest for meaning. In the end, the Jarmen culture is more than just an archaeological curiosity. It's a reflection of our shared human journey, a story that continues to inspire and challenge us as we navigate the complexities of our own time. So here's to the Jarmen, ancient artisans, community builders, and perhaps most importantly, a reminder that we are all part of a much larger tapestry, woven through time and bound by the same threads of creativity and resilience.